Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Nightmare Narratives. I can picture some of you already in bed, maybe some of you just getting home from work. Wherever you are, whatever time it is, I'm glad you're here. If this helps you relax or sleep, please like and subscribe. It means a lot. Now let's get you comfortable, and I'll tell you tonight's story. My name is Mary Catherine Ashworth, but everyone calls me Kate. I've been a ranger at Pine Mountain State Resort Park in eastern Kentucky for 6 years now, and I thought I'd seen everything these old mountains could show me. I was wrong. I grew up in these hills, raised by my coal mining grandparents after my parents died in a car wreck when I was 5. Grandma Ashworth used to tell me stories about the old coal camps, places where whole families lived and worked and died together. She'd talk about the camp children, spirits of kids who never got to grow up. I figured they were just stories to keep me from wandering too far into the woods. After the mining disaster in '76 took my grandfather and 14 other men, I decided to become a park ranger. Someone needed to preserve what was left of our mountain heritage before it all got buried under progress. The job suited me. I liked working with school groups, teaching kids about how their great-grandparents lived. History felt safer than the present sometimes. October in the mountains is my favorite time of year. The leaves turn every shade of fire you can imagine, and the air gets that crisp bite that makes you want to breathe deeper. That particular Tuesday morning started perfect. Sunny skies, temperature in the 60s, ideal weather for the field trip I had planned. Mrs. Rodriguez brought 23 sixth graders from Hazard Elementary to tour the old Blackberry Creek coal camp. The site sits about 8 miles from the nearest active community, tucked back in a hollow where the company built it in 1920. Most of the buildings are gone now, just foundations and a few walls still standing. But you can still see where the company store was, where the school used to be, where families lived in identical white houses lined up in neat rows. "Miss Kate, why did they build the houses so close together?" asked Jen E. Morrison, an 11-year-old with curious brown eyes and pigtails tied with pink ribbons. "Well, Jenny, the coal company wanted to keep all their workers right here where they could watch them," I explained, leading the group past the crumbling foundation of what used to be someone's home. Families rented these houses from the company, bought their groceries at the company store, sent their kids to the company school. Everything belonged to the mining company. The kids scattered to explore, staying within the boundaries I'd set. Mrs. Rodriguez kept count while I pointed out different buildings and explained how life worked in the camp. Normal field trip stuff. Kids asking questions, taking pictures, collecting leaves for their nature journals. But something felt different that morning. Maybe it was how quiet the birds were, or the way the air seemed thicker around certain spots. When we reached the old school foundation, I noticed the temperature dropped about 10 degrees. My breath came out in little puffs, even though the sun was shining bright. "Miss Kate, do you hear that?" Tommy Chen whispered, tugging on my sleeve. I stopped talking and listened. Very faint, like it was coming from far away, I could swear I heard children's voices. Singing, maybe, or reciting something. "Probably just the wind through the trees," I told him, but my voice sounded uncertain even to me. We broke for lunch around noon. The kids spread out on the flat area where the company store used to be, eating sandwiches and drinking juice boxes. Mrs. Rodriguez and I sat on a fallen log, going over the afternoon schedule. "They're really engaged today," she said, watching her students. "Look at Jenny. She's been talking to herself all morning, but she seems happy." I looked over at Jenny. She was sitting by herself near some broken concrete steps, having what looked like a conversation with empty air. Her head tilted like she was listening to someone, then she'd nod and giggle. "Jenny," I called, "you doing okay over there?" She looked up and waved. "I'm fine, Miss Kate, just talking to Susie. She's been showing me where the old schoolroom was." Mrs. Rodriguez and I exchanged glances. "There's no one named Susie on this trip," she murmured. "Probably an imaginary friend," I said, but something cold crawled up my spine. Kids that age still do that sometimes. After lunch, I gathered everyone for the final part of the tour, the old cemetery. It wasn't much to look at, just a flat area behind where the company store used to be. Most of the wooden markers had rotted away decades ago, leaving just faint impressions in the ground. "This is where the Camp families buried their loved ones," I explained. "The coal company didn't provide proper headstones for most folks. If you look close, you can still see some of the old grave sites." That's when Mrs. Rodriguez started counting heads and came up one short. "Jenny," she called. "Jenny Morrison?" We all looked around. No pink ribbons, no curious brown eyes. "She was right here a minute ago," Tommy said, pointing to the broken steps where Jenny had been sitting. "She went with Susie to see something." My ranger training kicked in immediately. "Everyone stay exactly where you are," I commanded, pulling out my radio. "Mrs. Rodriguez, keep the kids together. I'm calling for backup." The radio crackled with static, but dispatch came through clear enough. Search and rescue would be there in 20 minutes. Standard procedure for a missing child in wilderness area. But as I walked over to where Jenny had been sitting, I saw something that made my blood run cold. Her half-eaten sandwich was sitting on what looked like an invisible desk, perfectly arranged like someone had set a place at a table that wasn't there. And next to it, spelled out in coal dust on the broken concrete, were the words, "Welcome to our school." The search teams arrived faster than I expected. State police, volunteer firefighters, then some miners from the active operations down the mountain. Deputy Sheriff Mike Collins took charge, organizing search patterns while I provided information about the terrain and potential hazards. "A lot of old mine shafts back in these hills," warned Billy Fletcher, one of the volunteer searchers. Billy was about 40, born and raised in these mountains. "Some of them openings are covered over with brush. Easy for a kid to fall through without seeing it coming." We started with the most logical areas, the paths Jenny might have taken from where she was last seen. The search dogs picked up her scent immediately, following a clear trail from the concrete steps toward the old school foundation. But then something strange happened. The dogs stopped dead about 50 feet from the ruined building. Both German shepherds sat down and refused to go further, whining and backing away from an area that looked no different from anywhere else. "What's wrong with them?" Mrs. Rodriguez asked, watching the dogs strain against their leashes in the opposite direction. "Sometimes animals pick up on things we miss," said Collins diplomatically. But I could see the confusion in his face. These were experienced search dogs. They didn't spook easily. I decided to follow Jenny's trail myself. Her small footprints were clear in the soft soil, heading straight toward the school foundation. Size 4 sneakers, distinctive waffle pattern on the soles. Easy to track, until they weren't. The footprints ended at the edge of what used to be the school's front steps. Not faded or obscured, they just stopped, like Jenny had vanished into thin air. I knelt down and studied the ground carefully. No signs of struggle, no indication she'd been carried away. The tracks simply ended. "This doesn't make sense," I muttered, examining every inch of soil around the area. That's when I heard it clearly for the first time, children's voices coming from somewhere below my feet. Faint but unmistakable, like a classroom full of kids reciting their lessons. A is for apple, B is for ball, C is for cat. I pressed my ear to the ground. The voices were definitely coming from underground, somewhere beneath the old school foundation. But according to the historical records, there had never been a basement under the schoolhouse. "Deputy Collins," I called, "I need you to hear this." He jogged over, looking skeptical, until I had him kneel down and listen. His expression changed immediately. "Are there any old tunnels under this area?" he asked. "Not according to any maps I've seen," I replied. "But these old coal camps, sometimes the miners dug unofficial tunnels to get around during bad weather. We called in ground-penetrating equipment, but that would take hours to arrive from Lexington. Meanwhile, I organized the other searchers to look for possible tunnel entrances." Jenny had been missing for over 2 hours now, and with evening coming on, hypothermia became a real concern. Tommy Chen approached me while I was studying an old survey map of the camp. "Miss Kate, I remember what Jenny said about Susie." "What about her, Tommy?" "She said Susie was wearing a really old dress, like from the olden days, and she had coal dust on her face, like she'd been playing in the dirt." Tommy's voice dropped to a whisper. but Susie looked kind of see-through, like she wasn't all the way there. I felt that cold crawl up my spine again. "Did you see this girl, Susie?" Tommy nodded slowly. She was little, maybe 8 years old. She kept saying she wanted Jenny to come play with her and the other kids underground where it's warm and safe. Mrs. Rodriguez had been listening to our conversation. Her face had gone pale. "Kate, I need to tell you something. This morning during the tour, several of my students mentioned playing with children they described as old-timey looking. I thought they were just being imaginative." "How many students said this?" "At least 6 or 7. This is. I all described the same thing. Kids in old-fashioned clothes who seemed to know all about life in the coal camp." By late afternoon, we'd found 3 possible tunnel entrances, all of them hidden behind overgrown vegetation and partially collapsed. The largest opening was behind the foundation of what used to be the company store. It was barely wide enough for an adult to squeeze through, but definitely big enough for a child. I grabbed my flashlight and radio. "I'm going down to check this out." "Kate, that's not safe," Collins protested. "We don't know if those tunnels are stable. A little girl is down there somewhere. I'm not waiting for specialized equipment while she's in danger." The tunnel was cramped and musty, smelling of damp earth and something else, something sweet and stale, like old flowers. My flashlight beam revealed rough-hewn walls and a floor worn smooth by decades of foot traffic. This wasn't a natural cave. Someone had deliberately carved these passages. About 20 feet in, the tunnel opened into a larger chamber. I swept my light around the space and nearly dropped the flashlight in shock. The room was set up like a classroom from the early 1900s, wooden desks arranged in neat rows, a chalkboard mounted on one wall, even an old pot-bellied stove in the corner. Everything was in perfect condition, as if it had been preserved in a time capsule. And sitting at one of the desks, perfectly calm and unharmed, was Jenny Morrison. "Jenny!" I called out, rushing toward her. "Sweetie, are you okay? Everyone's been looking for you." She looked up at me with a dreamy expression, like she was waking up from a pleasant nap. "Oh, hi, Miss Kate. I'm in school right now. Susie and her friends have been teaching me about the old days." "Susie and her friends? Where are they, honey?" Jenny gestured vaguely around the room. "They're right here. Can't you see? Them?" I swept my flashlight across the room again. Empty desks, shadows dancing on the walls, but no other children. The temperature down here was at least 20 degrees colder than the surface, and I could see my breath in the beam of the flashlight. "Jenny, we need to get you out of here. Your teacher and your classmates are worried sick." But as I reached for her hand, Jenny pulled back. "I don't want to leave yet. We're having so much fun, and Susie says there are more games to play." That's when I heard it. Other children's voices, coming from somewhere deeper in the tunnel system. Giggling, whispering, calling Jenny's name. "Come play with us, Jenny. Come see our special place." The voices sounded far away and very close at the same time, like they were coming from all around us. And there was something about them that made my skin crawl. They had the hollow, echoing quality of voices calling from the bottom of a deep well. I grabbed Jenny's arm more firmly. "We're leaving now." But as I pulled her toward the tunnel entrance, every light source in the room suddenly went out. My flashlight, the emergency lantern I'd brought, even the luminous hands on my watch. We were plunged into absolute darkness. And in that darkness, I heard the sound of children's laughter, growing closer and closer. In the complete darkness of that underground classroom, I felt small hands grabbing at my clothes and hair. Not rough or violent, playful like children trying to get my attention. But there were too many hands, more than could belong to Jenny alone, and they felt cold as ice water. "Miss Kate!" Jenny's voice came from somewhere to my right, dreamy and distant. "Don't be scared. They just want to play." I fumbled for my backup flashlight, hands shaking as I pulled it from my belt. When the beam cut through the darkness, I saw them. Children. Dozens of them, ranging in age from maybe 6 to 12. They wore clothes from different time periods, some in simple dresses and overalls from the early 1900s, others in outfits from the 30s and 40s, their Faces were pale, almost translucent, and coal dust streaked their cheeks like war paint. They stood in a loose circle around Jenny and me, smiling but not moving, waiting. A little girl stepped forward, the smallest one, maybe 8 years old, wearing a faded blue pinafore dress. Coal dust smudged her face, and her dark hair was tied back with what might have once been a white ribbon. "I'm Susie Fletcher," she said, in a voice like wind through dry leaves. "We've been waiting so long for new friends to come play with us." I tried to keep my voice steady. "Susie, we need to take Jenny back to her teacher now. Her family is worried about her." Susie tilted her head, considering this. "But we don't have families anymore. The sickness took them all away. That's why we stay here together, so we won't be lonely." More children stepped closer. A boy of about 10 with suspenders and a torn shirt spoke up. "I'm William Chen. That's my great-great-grandson up there." He pointed toward the ceiling. "Tommy looks just like I did when I was his age." "And I'm Martha Rodriguez," said a girl with braided hair. "Mrs. Rodriguez up there. She's got my family name. We're probably kin." The pieces started falling into place in my mind. Names from the old camp records, the 1918 flu epidemic that killed so many children, the unmarked graves behind the company store. These were the spirits of kids who had died nearly 60 years ago. "You all died in the influenza outbreak," I said softly. "We got sick and went to sleep," Susie explained matter-of-factly. "But when we woke up, everyone else was gone. So we came down here where it's always warm, and we made our own school and our own houses. And we've been waiting for friends ever since." Jenny stood up from her desk, moving like she was sleepwalking. "They've shown me how to play games from the old days, jacks and marbles and ring-around-toe." "Hey, Rosie. It's so much fun, Miss Kate." I noticed that Jenny's pink ribbons had changed to faded white ones, just like Susie's. Her modern clothes looked somehow duller, more old-fashioned, than they had an hour ago. "We should go back now, Jenny," I said, trying to keep the urgency out of my voice. But Susie shook her head. "She can't leave yet. None of them can leave yet. We're in the middle of a game." "What do you mean, none of them?" Susie smiled, and it was the most chilling thing I'd ever seen. A sweet, innocent expression on a face that belonged to a child who had been dead for 60 years. "Tommy came down to look for Jenny, and then Sarah and Michael came looking for Tommy, and then Mrs. Rodriguez came looking for all of them." Susie gestured toward a tunnel that led deeper into the hill. "They're all playing with us now." My heart nearly stopped. "How many children are down here?" "8 so far," said William Chen proudly. "But the rest will come soon. They always do, once they hear us playing." I grabbed my radio, praying it would work underground. Nothing but static. I was on my own. "I need to see the other children," I said, trying to sound calm and authoritative. "I need to make sure they're safe." The spirit children looked at each other, some kind of silent communication passing between them. Finally, Susie nodded. "Okay, but you have to promise not to try to take them away before the game is finished." "What game?" "The forever game," said Martha Rodriguez. "It's the best game of all. Once you start playing, you never have to stop." They led me deeper into the tunnel system, past rooms set up as dormitories and a dining hall and what looked like a recreation area. The whole underground complex was preserved perfectly, like a museum of childhood from a bygone era. In the recreation room, I found them, Tommy Chen and 3 other students from the field trip, sitting in a circle playing jacks with a set that looked like it was made from real bone. Mrs. Rodriguez sat nearby in a rocking chair that creaked rhythmically, even though no one was pushing it. But something was terribly wrong. Tommy looked younger than he had that morning, his face rounder, more childlike. The other students showed the same change, as if they were aging backward. And Mrs. Rodriguez looked like she'd aged 20 years in the span of a few hours. Her black hair was streaked with gray, and wrinkles lined her face where there had been smooth skin that morning. "Mrs. Rodriguez," I called softly. She looked up at me with confused, frightened eyes. "Kate? How did I get here? I was looking for my students, and then—" Her voice trailed off, uncertain. "Tommy, I said, kneeling down next to him. "How do you feel, buddy?" He giggled, a sound younger than his 11 years. "I feel great, Miss Kate. We're having the best time. William's been teaching me games his daddy taught him, and Susie's been showing us how they used to do arithmetic on slate boards. Tommy, do you remember your parents? Do you remember your house?" He frowned like he was trying to recall something from long ago. "I think so. Maybe. It's hard to remember things from before." That's when I understood what was happening. The spirit children weren't just keeping the living children here. They were transforming them, making them more like themselves, converting them into permanent playmates who would never grow up, never leave, never die. And the process was accelerating. "Susie," I said, turning to the little girl who seemed to be their leader, "how long do you plan to keep them here?" "Forever and ever," she replied happily. "That's how long the game lasts. We'll all be friends forever, and no one will ever be lonely again." I looked around at the spirit children, dozens of them now, filling the recreation room, all smiling those sweet, terrible smiles. Children who had been trapped in this place for 60 years, so hungry for companionship, that they were stealing living kids to fill the emptiness. "What happens when their families come looking for them?" I asked. "Their families will forget about them, just like our families." "Forgot about us," said William Chen matter-of-factly. "That's how it works when you play the forever game. Everyone from the old world forgets you, and you forget them too. All that matters is playing with your friends." Above us, I could hear the faint sound of search teams calling names, voices getting more desperate as evening approached. Parents had probably started arriving by now, frantic with worry for their missing children. I had to get the kids out of here. All of them. But as I started to stand up, the spirit children moved closer, forming a tighter circle around us. Not threatening, but definitely not letting us leave. "The game isn't over yet," Susie said softly. "And besides, Miss Kate, you're part of it now too. You came down here of your own free will. That means you want to play with us." I felt a cold certainty settle in my stomach. They weren't going to let any of us go. The spirit children guided us deeper into the tunnel complex to a large chamber that took my breath away. It was set up like a perfect recreation of an entire coal camp. Miniature houses with glowing windows, tiny streets laid out in neat grids, even a scaled-down version of the company store and school. But this wasn't a model or dollhouse. It was real, just somehow compressed into an underground space that should have been physically impossible. Children's voices drifted from the tiny houses, and I could smell wood smoke and cooking food. "Welcome to our home," Susie said proudly. "This is where we live when we're not at school or playing games. Every child who comes to stay with us gets their own house." Mrs. Rodriguez stumbled beside me, looking older by the minute. "Kate," she whispered, "I can barely remember why I came down here. Everything from before seems so far away." I realized that whatever force was transforming the children was affecting her too. But in reverse, instead of making her younger, it was rapidly aging her, as if her adult memories and experiences were being compressed and burned away. "How does this work?" I asked Susie, trying to buy time while I figured out an escape plan. "The first children who came here, us. We were so sad when we died. We didn't want to leave our games and our friends, so we stayed, and this place grew around us, keeping us safe and happy." Susie's translucent face glowed with pride. "Every time new children come to play, the place gets stronger, more real." "But what about their families? What about the lives they're supposed to live?" A shadow crossed Susie's features. "Families just make you sad when they go away. Here, nobody ever goes away. Nobody ever grows up and stops wanting to play. Nobody ever gets old and dies and leaves you all alone." I understood now. These children had died young and traumatized, probably scared and confused as the influenza took their families one by one. Their collective grief and terror had created this pocket of preserved childhood, sustained by the life force of new victims. "Susie," I said gently, "do you remember your mother and father?" Her smile faltered slightly. "Mama got sick first, then Papa, then me. Her voice became very small. I called and called for them, but they couldn't hear me anymore. I bet they tried to find you. I bet they're still trying to find you somewhere. No, she said firmly. Dead people don't look for dead people. That's why we need the living children, so someone will play with us and remember our names. Around us, the other spirit children had grown quiet, listening to our conversation. I noticed that some of them looked uncertain, like they were remembering things they'd tried to forget. That's when I heard it, the sound of heavy machinery above us. The ground-penetrating equipment had finally arrived, and they were scanning for underground spaces. It wouldn't be long before they found the tunnel entrances. "Miss Kate?" Tommy called from where he was playing with a group of spirit children near one of the tiny houses. I don't feel good. Everything keeps changing. I looked at him and felt sick. Tommy now appeared to be about 8 years old, his face round with baby fat, his clothes hanging loose on his shrinking frame. The other living children showed similar transformations. They were rapidly reverting to younger and younger versions of themselves. They're dying, I realized, the words coming out as a whisper. Not dying, Susie corrected me. Joining. Becoming part of our family forever. By forgetting everything about their real lives. By losing who they are. Who they were didn't matter, said William Chen. Down here, they can be children forever, just like us. No school tests or chores or parents telling them what to do. Just games and fun, all the time. The machinery sounds above got louder. Any minute now, the rescue teams would break through and find us. But would it be too late? I made a desperate decision. Susie, what if I told you there was a way to be remembered without keeping these children here? A way for people to know your names and tell your stories without forgetting their own families. She tilted her head, curious. What do you mean? Up there, in the world you came from, people study history. They learn about children like you, brave kids who lived through hard times. If I promised to make sure everyone remembers the children of Blackberry Creek Coal Camp, would you let these kids go back to their families? The other spirit children murmured among themselves, considering this. But then we'd be alone again, said Martha Rodriguez. We'd have nobody to play with. You'd have each other, just like you did before. And every year, I'd bring school children to visit and learn about how you lived. They'd know your names, know your stories. You'd never be forgotten. It's not the same as having friends to play with all the time, Susus, I said sadly. Above us, I heard the sound of drilling. The rescue teams were breaking through. Susie, I said urgently, do you remember what it felt like when your parents died? How much it hurt to lose them? Her translucent eyes filled with tears. It was the worst feeling in the whole world. That's what those children's parents are feeling right now. That's what Mrs. Rodriguez's family is feeling. You're making other people hurt the same way you hurt. The spirit children looked at each other, and I could see the conflict in their faces. They wanted friends, wanted not to be alone, but they also remembered the pain of loss. If we let them go, Susie asked quietly, do you promise to come back? Do you promise to remember us? I promise. Every year, I'll bring students to learn about the coal camp children. Your names will be on a memorial. Your stories will be told. The sound of drilling stopped. Voices echoed down the tunnels. The rescue teams were close. Susie looked around at all the other spirit children, some kind of silent vote taking place. Finally, she nodded. Okay, but Miss Kate, you have to keep your promise. If you forget about us, we'll come find you. I won't forget. The spirit children stepped back, and immediately the living children began to return to their normal ages. Color returned to Mrs. Rodriguez's face, and she blinked in confusion as her memories came flooding back. Kate? Oh my God, where are my students? We have to find them. They're right here, I said, gathering Tommy and the others. Everyone's safe. Flashlight beams appeared at the tunnel entrance, and I heard Deputy Collins calling my name. We're here, I shouted back. We found them. Everyone's alive. As the rescue teams reached us, I looked back at Susie and the other spirit children. They were already fading, becoming more translucent. Remember your promise, Susie says. He whispered. "I will," I said. "I'll remember all of you." The official report stated that the missing children and teacher had taken shelter in an old mining tunnel during an unexpected temperature drop. No mention of spirit children or supernatural encounters, just a bureaucratic summary of a search and rescue operation with a positive outcome. But I kept my promise. 3 months later, Pine Mountain State Park unveiled the Blackberry Creek Coal Camp Memorial. 89 small white crosses marked the area behind the old company store, each one bearing the name of a child who died in the 1918 influenza outbreak. Susie Fletcher, William Chen, Martha Rodriguez, all of them remembered at last. The memorial service drew dozens of families, descendants of coal camp workers, local historians, and school groups from across eastern Kentucky. I gave a speech about the importance of remembering the children who came before us, about honoring their memories and learning from their experiences. During the ceremony, I noticed several people commenting on the unusual warmth around the memorial site, despite the December cold. Children in the audience reported seeing other kids their age playing quietly among the crosses. But when adults looked, nothing was there. The field trip program resumed the following spring. I developed a new curriculum focused on the daily lives of coal camp children, their games, their schools, their struggles and joys. Students loved hearing about kids their own age from a different time period, and many wrote reports about what life was like in the early 1900s. Jenny Morrison, fully recovered from her experience, wrote a particularly moving essay about the importance of friendship and remembering people who have passed away. Tommy Chen started a local history club at his middle school. Mrs. Rodriguez requested to bring her classes back to the coal camp site every year. None of them remembered the supernatural events clearly. Their memories were hazy, dreamlike. But they all felt a connection to the place and its history that went beyond normal educational experience. I still hear the children sometimes, especially during school visits. Faint laughter echoing from empty foundations, the sound of games being played just out of sight. But it's not frightening anymore. It's peaceful, like the sound of kids playing in a distant playground. The tunnel system was officially sealed after a safety inspection revealed unstable conditions. The entrances were covered with concrete and marked with warning signs. But I know the children are still down there, in their preserved pocket of eternal childhood. Only now they're content to play among themselves, secure in the knowledge that they haven't been forgotten. Other park rangers started reporting similar incidents at historical sites across Appalachian coal country. Children glimpsed in period clothing at abandoned mining towns, voices of kids reciting lessons in the ruins of old schoolhouses, playground games continuing long after the playgrounds had crumbled away. I was quietly recruited to consult on these cases, helping to establish memorial programs, creating educational initiatives that honored the memories of historical child victims. It became an unofficial network of rangers and historians dedicated to giving voice to the forgotten young. The work changed me. I developed a sensitivity to places where children had lived and died, an ability to sense lingering grief and unfinished childhood. It's not a gift I would have asked for, but it's one I've learned to use responsibly. Last month marked the 5th anniversary of the Blackberry Creek Memorial. During the ceremony, a little girl in the audience tugged on my sleeve and pointed toward the white crosses. "Miss Kate," she whispered, "who are those kids playing over there?" I looked where she was pointing and saw them clearly for just a moment. Susie Fletcher and her friends playing ring around, the rosy among the memorial crosses, their laughter carried on the mountain wind. "Those are the coal camp children," I told her. "They're playing because they know they're remembered." The little girl nodded solemnly, as if this made perfect sense. "That's good. Everyone should be remembered." As the families dispersed and the sun set behind the mountains, I stood alone among the crosses for a few minutes. The air was warm despite the October chill, and I could smell the faint scent of wildflowers, the same flowers that had appeared on unmarked graves 60 years ago. "Thank you," I whispered to the quiet evening air. A child's voice, soft as leaves rustling, seemed to answer, "Thank you for keeping your promise." I walked back to my truck, knowing that I'd return next year, and the year after that, and for as many years as I remained a ranger in these mountains. Some promises are meant to be kept forever. After all, the dead children still need our love and attention. They still need to know that their short lives mattered, that their games and laughter and dreams weren't lost to time. And sometimes, if we listen carefully and remember faithfully, we can still hear them playing, not trapped between worlds anymore, but free to be children forever, secure in the knowledge that they will never be forgotten again. The Cole Camp children are at peace now, but they're still playing their games, somewhere in the spaces between memory and history, waiting for the next group of visitors to come, learn their names, and carry their stories forward into the light. My name is Elizabeth Moonrunner, but everyone calls me Liz. I've been a park ranger in the Great Smoky Mountains for 9 years now, and I thought I'd seen everything these old hills could throw at me. Lost hikers, angry bears, the occasional crazy person trying to camp where they shouldn't. But nothing prepared me for what happened during the February full moon of 1984. The call came in at 6 a.m. on a Tuesday. Ray Thompson, my supervisor, sounded tired over the radio. "Liz, we've got a situation up at Spence Field. A couple of backpackers got attacked by what they're saying was a giant wolf." I almost laughed. "Ray, you know there haven't been wolves in these mountains since the 1930s. Probably just a big dog or a black bear." That's what I figured too, but the male victim, Mark Kim, is in the hospital with bite wounds like nothing I've ever seen. And his girlfriend, Sarah Chen, she's missing. Been gone 2 days now. That got my attention. I grabbed my gear and headed out in the park truck, driving the winding mountain roads up to the trailhead. February in the Smokies is cold and gray, with patches of snow still clinging to the north-facing slopes. The bare trees looked like skeleton fingers against the cloudy sky. I'm half Cherokee, raised by my grandmother until I was 12. She used to tell me stories about the old days, about things that lived in these mountains that weren't quite natural. I never believed her stories about skinwalkers and shapeshifters. I had a PhD in wildlife biology and 9 years of ranger experience. I believed in science, not superstitions. The hike up to Spence Field took me 2 hours. It's a beautiful spot when the weather's nice, a big open meadow surrounded by mountains. But that day, something felt wrong the moment I stepped into the clearing. The air was too still. No birds singing. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. I found Tapirat. He campsite easily enough. Their tent was shredded to pieces, scattered across the grass like confetti, sleeping bags torn open, feathers everywhere. But what really got my attention was the blood. There was a lot of it, dark red stains on the grass and rocks. I followed the trail of blood across the meadow, expecting it to lead to an animal den or maybe a cliff where an injured person might have fallen. Instead, it just stopped at the edge of a rocky outcrop. Just stopped. Like whoever was bleeding had simply vanished into thin air. I spent the next hour looking for tracks. With my training, I can identify the footprints of any animal in these mountains. But what I found didn't make sense. There were human footprints. Mark's boots, I figured, and smaller ones that had to be Sarah's. But mixed in with them were paw prints that were way too big to be from any dog I'd ever seen. They looked like wolf tracks, but wolves the size of small horses. Even stranger, the paw prints seemed to change as I followed them. In some places, they looked normal. In others, they were deeper, like whatever made them was heavier. And in a few spots, I swear they looked more like human feet than animal paws. I took photos of everything and collected some hair samples from the torn tent. The hair was coarse and gray, definitely from some kind of wild animal. But it didn't smell right. Most animal fur has a clean, outdoorsy smell. This stuff smelled like old meat and something else I couldn't identify. Something rotten. By the time I hiked back down to my truck, the sun was setting behind the mountains. I'd been up there for 6 hours and still hadn't found any sign of Sarah Chen. As I drove back to the ranger station, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me from the dark trees along the road. That night, I called the hospital to check on Mark Kim. The nurse told me he was as stable but acting strange. "He keeps talking about a wolf that walked on 2 legs, she said. Claims it spoke to him in some foreign language before it attacked. The doctors think it's trauma from the attack. But I remembered my grandmother's words from when I was little. Some things in these mountains are older than the white man's roads, Lizzie. Older than his science books, too. I hung up the phone and looked out my cabin window at the full moon rising over the peaks. The Cherokee called February's full moon the hunger moon because it was the time of year when food was scarce and the wild things got desperate. Something told me this was going to be a long night. I didn't sleep much that night. Every little sound outside my cabin made me jump. Branches creaking in the wind, an owl calling in the distance, something that might have been footsteps on my porch. When morning came, I was already dressed and ready to head back up the mountain. The plan was simple: find Sarah Chen, dead or alive, and figure out what kind of animal had attacked them. I brought extra supplies this time: a tranquilizer gun, tracking equipment, and my emergency radio, though it didn't work well up in the higher elevations. I started at Spence Field again, but this time I expanded my search pattern. About a mile east of the campsite, I found something that made my blood run cold. It was another campsite, but this one was old, maybe a week or two. The tent was destroyed just like Mark and Sarah's, but what was left of it was covered in a thin layer of snow and leaves. I almost missed it. But I didn't miss the bones. They were scattered around what used to be a fire ring, picked clean and white. At first I thought they might be from animals the campers had been eating, but when I looked closer, I saw a hiking boot with a foot still in it, hidden under a pile of leaves. My hands were shaking as I called it in on the radio. Ray's voice crackled back, barely audible through the static. "Say again, Liz. Did you say human remains?" "That's right. Looks like another attack, maybe 10 days ago. Ray, we need to close this whole area down until we figure out what's going on up here." "Copy that. I'm sending Marcus Rivera up to help with the search. Watch yourself up there." Marcus was a good ranger, been with the Park Service for 5 years. He was also the closest thing I had to a best friend since my divorce 6 months earlier. If I had to be stuck on a dangerous mountain with anyone, I was glad it was him. While I waited for Marcus to arrive, I kept searching. The bone site was about 200 yards from a small stream that fed into Cataract Falls. The water was crystal clear and ice cold, running fast over smooth rocks. I knelt down to fill my water bottle, and that's when I saw them. More tracks in the soft mud by the stream. But these were different from the ones at the campsite. These looked almost human, except for the claws. And they were fresh. The edges were still sharp, not worn down by the running water. I followed the tracks along the stream for about 50 yards before they disappeared onto rocky ground. But just before I lost the trail, I found something else. A piece of fabric caught on a thorn bush. It was red nylon, the same color as the jacket Sarah Chen had been wearing according to the missing person report. "Sarah?" I called out, my voice echoing off the rocks. "Sarah, if you can hear me, I'm here to help." The only answer was the sound of water running over stones and the wind in the bare branches above me. But I had the strangest feeling that something was listening. Marcus arrived just before noon, huffing and puffing from the steep hike up. He was carrying a backpack full of search and rescue gear, including a portable radio that might work better than mine. "Jesus, Liz," he said when I showed him the bone site. "What kind of animal does this?" "I don't know. The bite marks are consistent with a large predator, but the behavior is all wrong. Bears don't hunt humans like this. Neither do mountain lions." We spent the afternoon searching the area in a grid pattern, calling Sarah's name and looking for more signs. Just before sunset, we found another piece of her jacket, this one near the entrance to a small cave about half a mile upstream. "Think she went in there to hide?" Marcus asked, shining his flashlight into the dark opening. The cave mouth was maybe 4 feet high and 6 feet wide. I couldn't see how deep it went. A cold breeze was coming out of it, carrying that same rotten smell I'd noticed on the animal hair at the first campsite. "Only one way to find out," I said, but every instinct I had was screaming at me not to go in there. We crawled into the cave on our hands and knees. After about 20 feet, it opened up into a larger chamber where we could stand up. Marcus swept his light around the walls, and we both gasped at what we saw. Claw marks, hundreds of them, scraped deep into the rock walls. Some looked fresh, others were old and weathered. They went all the way up to the ceiling, which was at least 12 feet high. "What could make marks like that?" Marcus whispered. Before I could answer, we heard something that made us both freeze. It was coming from deeper in the cave, echoing off the walls. A low rumbling sound that was part growl, part human moan. And then, clear as day, we heard a voice speaking Cherokee words I remembered from my childhood. Dohi Ayahusti, Dohi Ayahusti. Until the end, until the end. Marcus grabbed my arm. "Liz, we need to get out of here. Now." I couldn't move. My grandmother's voice was echoing in my head, telling me stories I'd thought were just fairy tales. Stories about Cherokee medicine men who refused to leave the mountains when the soldiers came. Men who made dark bargains with the spirits to protect the land. The growling sound was getting closer. "Liz!" Marcus yanked on my arm. "Move!" We scrambled out of that cave faster than I'd ever moved in my life. We didn't stop running until we reached our trucks at a trailhead. It was full dark by then, and the hunger moon was rising above the peaks like a giant eye. "We're coming back tomorrow with backup," Marcus said, his face pale in the moonlight. "And bigger guns." As we drove down the mountain, I kept checking my rearview mirror. I swear I could see something following us, keeping pace with our trucks but staying just out of sight in the trees. That night, I called my grandmother in Cherokee, North Carolina. She was 87 years old and sharper than most people half her age. "Grandma, tell me again about the skinwalkers, the ones who stayed behind." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. When she spoke, her voice was heavy with worry. "Why do you ask, child?" I told her about the attacks, the cave, the Cherokee words we'd heard. Another long silence. "The old ones are waking up, Lizzie. The land remembers the suffering, and it's calling them back. You need to be very careful. Your blood protects you, but only if you remember who you are." "Grandma, that's just old stories." "No, child. Some stories are true, and some truths are hungry." I didn't wait for backup. Something told me Sarah Chen was running out of time, and I'd already lost too much of it convincing myself this was just an unusual animal attack. I went back up the mountain alone the next morning, carrying every piece of protective equipment I could fit in my pack. Tranquilizer gun, emergency flares, first aid kit, and my grandmother's old medicine pouch that I'd never had the heart to throw away. The cave looked different in daylight. Less threatening maybe, but the smell was stronger. That rotten meat smell mixed with something else, something like wet dog and old sweat. I forced myself to crawl back into the darkness. This time, I went deeper. Past the claw-marked chamber, through a narrow passage that opened into another room. My flies, Schlight beams swept across the walls, and I had to bite my tongue to keep from screaming. The walls were covered with drawings, old Cherokee symbols mixed with cruder pictures that looked like they'd been scratched into the rock with claws. Pictures of wolves walking on two legs. Pictures of humans changing into animals. And in the center of it all, a figure with the head of a wolf and the body of a man, surrounded by smaller figures that might have been people or might have been prey. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the bones. They were piled in the corners like cordwood. Human bones, picked clean and white. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds. Some looked old, stained dark with age. Others were fresh. And sitting on top of the newest pile, like someone had carefully placed it there for me to find, was a driver's license. Sarah Chen's driver's license. "Sarah!" I called out, my voice cracking with fear and hope. "Sarah, are you in here?" A sound answered me from the deepest part of the cave. Not quite human, not quite animal. A whimpering, pleading sound that raised every hair on my arms. I followed the sound deeper into the mountain. The cave system was bigger than I'd imagined, with passages branching off in all directions. Some were too small to crawl through. Others disappeared into darkness that my flashlight couldn't penetrate. I found her in a chamber about the size of my living room. Sarah Chen was alive, but barely. She was curled up in a corner, naked and shivering, covered in scratches and bite marks. Her hair was matted with mud and blood, and her eyes had a wild look that I'd seen before in animals caught in traps. "Sarah? My name is Liz. I'm a park ranger. I'm here to get you out." She looked at me but didn't seem to understand. When I moved closer, she backed away and made that whimpering sound again. "It's okay. You're safe now. I'm going to—" A growl cut me off, deep and threatening, coming from the passage behind me. I spun around and saw eyes reflecting my flashlight beam. Yellow eyes, way too high off the ground to belong to any normal animal. "Get behind me, Sarah," I whispered, pulling out my tranquilizer gun with shaking hands. The thing in the passage stepped into the light, and I understood why Mark Kim thought he was hallucinating in the hospital. It was a wolf, but wrong. Too big, maybe 7 feet tall when it reared up on its hind legs. Its front paws had fingers, not quite human, but close enough to use tools, to open tent zippers, to arrange bones in piles. But the worst part was its face. Under the wolf features, I could see human intelligence, human knowledge, and when it spoke, the voice was like nothing I'd ever heard. "Tsiyuhi," it said in Cherokee. "Welcome home, daughter of the people." I nearly dropped my gun. "You can talk. I can do many things the white man's science cannot explain." The creature's voice was like gravel in a blender, but the words were clear. "You smell of our blood, but you serve their law." "I don't know what you're talking about. I just want to help this girl." The wolf thing laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "This girl took from sacred ground. She and her mate pitched their tent on the bones of my family. They cooked their food with wood from trees that grow in my children's graves." I looked back at Sarah. She was watching our conversation with those wild eyes, but she seemed to understand what was happening. "That doesn't give you the right to hunt people." "Hunt?" The creature stepped closer, and I could smell the death on its breath. "I do not hunt, granddaughter. I collect what is owed. 150 winters I have walked these mountains, gathering the debt your people abandoned when they let the soldiers drive them away." My grandmother's stories came flooding back. The Cherokee medicine man who refused to join the Trail of Tears, who stayed behind to guard the sacred places and made a bargain with dark spirits to give him the strength to protect the land forever. "You're Kituwa," I whispered. "You're the one from the stories." "Stories." He spit the word like it tasted bad. "The white people turned our history into stories, our warnings into fairy tales. But the mountains remember, even if our children have forgotten." Behind him I could see other shapes moving in the darkness, more eyes reflecting my light. The pack he'd gathered over the years, people like Sarah who'd been changed by his bite. "Sarah isn't Cherokee," I said. "She didn't abandon anything." "But you did." Kitua's yellow eyes fixed on mine. "You serve their government. You protect their tourists. You let them desecrate our ancestors' bones for their vacation photos. I protect the land, same as you. No, child, you protect their access to the land. There is a difference." More growls from the darkness. I could hear footsteps, some on 4 legs, some on 2. The pack was surrounding us. "Your grandmother's blood protects you from my bite," Kitua said, "but it will not protect her." He gestured toward Sarah with one clawed hand. "Or the others who will come looking for you." "Others?" "Your ranger friend, your supervisor. The soldiers they will send when you do not return. I will take them all, and they will help me reclaim what was stolen." I thought about Marcus, probably wondering why I wasn't answering my radio. About Ray Thompson, who'd trusted me to handle this situation. About all the innocent campers and hikers who had no idea what was waiting for them in these mountains. "What do you want?" I asked. Kitua smiled, showing teeth like broken glass. "I want you to choose, granddaughter. Will you stand with your grandmother's people, or with the ones who drove us from our homes?" Before I could answer, Sarah Chen screamed. Not the weak whimper she'd been making before, but a long, howling sound that echoed off the cave walls. When I turned to look at her, she was changing. Her fingernails were growing longer, turning into claws. Her face was stretching, becoming more animal than human. Coarse hair was sprouting from her arms and shoulders. "The hunger moon grows stronger," Kitua said. "Soon she will be one of us, as will all who taste my gift." I raised the tranquilizer gun, but my hands were shaking so bad I could barely aim it. Choose quickly, granddaughter. My pack grows restless. The transformation didn't take long. 1 minute, Sarah Chen was a terrified college student. The next, she was something out of my grandmother's darkest warnings. She moved like a wolf, but thought like a human, the worst of both worlds combined. She came at me with claws extended and teeth bared, moving faster than anything human had a right to move. I pulled the trigger on the tranquilizer gun, but the dart bounced off her hide like it was made of stone. Iron and drugs have no power here, Kituwa said. He sounded almost sad. This is the old world, child. Your science cannot help you. Sarah's claws raked across my arm, tearing through my jacket like paper. The pain was sharp and immediate, but what scared me more was that I could feel something else in the wounds, something hot and burning, like infection setting in fast. I stumbled backward, pulling out an emergency flare and igniting it. The sudden red light made all of them recoil, snarling and covering their eyes. Fire, I said. You don't like fire. Fire is sacred to the Cherokee, Kituwa said. It cannot be used to harm the people. But I wasn't Cherokee, not completely. I was half white, half Cherokee, caught between two worlds, just like I'd always been. The flare stayed bright in my hands. Using the light to keep them back, I started moving toward the cave entrance. If I could get outside, maybe I could call for help. Maybe Marcus would come looking for me. But I'd gone maybe 20 feet when I heard voices echoing down the tunnels. Human voices calling my name. Liz! Liz, where are you? And it was Marcus, and he wasn't alone. I could hear at least 2 other people with him. No, I whispered. Stay away. But they were already in the cave system, following my flashlight marks, and the sound of the flare. I could hear them getting closer, their voices bouncing off the rock walls. More gifts, Kituwa said, and his pack started moving toward the sounds. I had maybe 30 seconds to decide. I could run for the entrance, try to warn Marcus and whoever was with him. But that would mean leaving Sarah and any other victims behind. Or I could go deeper into the caves and try to find another way out. But that meant letting the pack hunt my friends. My grandmother's medicine pouch felt warm against my chest. Without really thinking about it, I pulled it out and opened it. Inside were things I'd never paid much attention to. Dried herbs, small stones, a piece of carved bone. But there was something else. A folded piece of paper with Cherokee words written in my grandmother's careful handwriting. Words I'd heard her say when she was praying or performing ceremonies. What are you doing? Kituwa asked, but his voice had changed. Less confident, more worried. I started reading the words aloud, stumbling over the pronunciation. I didn't know what they meant, but I could feel power in them. Real power, older than the Park Service, and older than the white man's science. The effect on the pack was immediate. They started backing away, whimpering and covering their ears. Even Kituwa looked uncertain. You do not know what you are doing, child. Maybe not, but my grandmother did. I kept reading, my voice getting stronger as I went. The words seemed to come easier now, like muscle memory from all those ceremonies I'd watched as a kid without understanding what was happening. The pack retreated to the far end of the chamber, but they couldn't run. Something about the ceremony was holding them there, forcing them to listen. Liz! Marcus's voice was closer now, too close. Stay back, I shouted. Don't come in here. But I could hear footsteps in the passage. Marcus and at least 2 other people heading straight into a trap. That's when Kituwa made his move. While I was distracted, he lunged at me, moving faster than anything that big should be able to move. His claws caught the paper in my hands, tearing it to pieces. The ceremony stopped. The pack started advancing again. But something had changed. The scratches on my arm from Sarah's attack weren't burning anymore. They were healing. The bleeding already stopped. Your grandmother's blood is stronger than I thought, Kituwa said. But it will not save your friends. The pack flowed past me like water, heading for the tunnel where Marcus's voice was coming from. I heard shouts, then screams, then the unmistakable sound of gunfire. I ran after them, the flare still burning in my hand, but I was too late. I found Marcus and Ray Thompson backed against a wall in one of the side chambers, along with a young ranger I didn't recognize. They were shooting at shapes in the darkness, but their bullets weren't doing any good. "The Cherokee ceremony," I shouted at them. "I need to finish the Cherokee ceremony." "What the hell are you talking about?" Ray yelled back, reloading his weapon. "Trust me." I closed my eyes and tried to remember the words my grandmother used to say. Not the ones on the paper, but older ones. Ones she'd whispered to me when I was sick as a child. Words about protection and healing and setting the dead to rest. When I spoke them aloud, everything changed. The pack stopped attacking and turned to look at me. The air in the cave grew warm, then hot. I could smell sage and sweetgrass, like someone was burning sacred plants. And then I saw them. Spirits, translucent and glowing, filling the chamber. Cherokee ancestors, their faces sad but determined. They moved between me and the pack, forming a barrier of light and memory. Kituwa howled in age and despair. "I did this for you, for all of you." One of the spirits stepped forward, an old woman wearing traditional Cherokee clothing. She looked at Kituwa with eyes full of love and sorrow. "My son," she said in Cherokee, "your pain has lasted long enough. They drove us from our homes. They destroyed our sacred places. And you have become the very thing that drove us away, a creature that hunts and kills without mercy." Kituwa fell to his knees, the wolf features melting away to reveal the man underneath. He was ancient, his face lined with grief and exhaustion. "I only wanted to protect what was ours." "I know," the old woman said, "but this is not protection. This is revenge. And revenge eats the heart from the inside until nothing good remains." She touched his face with one ghostly hand, and he began to change. Not into a wolf this time, but into something peaceful. The anger and pain flowed out of him like water, leaving behind only a tired old man who had carried his burden too long. "Rest now," the old woman said. "Let the living guard the sacred places. Your watch is ended." Kituwa smiled for the first time since I'd met him. "Grandmother?" "Yes, child. Come home." The spirits gathered around him, and together they began to fade. As they disappeared, I felt something change in the cave. The wrongness was lifting. The oppressive weight of old grief and anger was finally letting go. The pack collapsed where they stood. Sarah Chen and all the others were human again, unconscious but breathing. The curse was broken. Sarah Chen spent 3 weeks in the hospital, but she recovered completely. So did the others we found in the caves. 12 people who'd been missing over the past 5 years, all presumed dead. They had no memory of their time as part of the pack, which the doctors said was probably a mercy. The official report blamed everything on a gas leak in the cave system that caused hallucinations and violent behavior. The missing persons were explained as people who'd gotten lost in the caves and suffered from exposure and trauma. The deaths were attributed to wild animal attacks. Nobody mentioned skinwalkers or Cherokee curses in any of the paperwork. Marcus quit the Park Service a month later. He moved to Florida and got a job with the Wildlife Service there, as far from the mountains as he could get. We still talk sometimes, but we never discuss what happened in those caves. Ray Thompson took early retirement. Before he left, he pulled me aside and told me the Park Service was starting a new program, working with tribal councils to identify and protect Native American sacred sites. He recommended me for the position. "Some places need special guardians," he said, "people who understand both worlds." I took the job. It meant traveling all over the country, working with different tribes to preserve sacred sites and prevent the kind of tragedy that had created Kituwa in the first place. It also meant embracing the Cherokee side of my heritage that I'd spent years trying to ignore. My grandmother was proud, but not surprised. "The ancestors knew what they were doing when they chose you," she said. "Some bridges can only be built by people who belong on both sides." I still patrol the Smokies sometimes, especially during the full moons. The mountains are peaceful now, but I know that peace has to be protected. There are other sites, other wounded places where old pain has festered into something dangerous. The cave system where Kituwa made his stand was sealed off and designated as a Cherokee cultural preservation site. No more campers pitch their tents on ancient burial grounds. No more hikers build fires with wood from sacred groves. But sometimes, on quiet nights when the moon is full, I still hear howling in the distant mountains. Not the angry, hungry sound of the pack, but something sadder and more human. The sound of spirits saying goodbye, finally ready to rest. The Cherokee have a saying, the land remembers everything. The bad and the good, the pain and the healing. My job now is to make sure the memory includes both, so the dead can finally find peace and the living can learn from their mistakes. The hunger moon still rises every February, but it's not hungry anymore. It's watchful, keeping an eye on the ancient places and the people sworn to protect them. And I keep my grandmother's medicine pouch with me always, because some truths are too important to forget, even when they're frightening. Especially then. The mountains are listening, and now I know how to listen back. My name is Samuel Coleridge, but everyone calls me Sam. I've been working for West Virginia State Parks for 18 years now, and I thought I'd seen everything these mountains could throw at me. I was wrong. It was November 1967, and I was driving up the winding dirt road to Devil's Backbone State Forest. The fog hung thick between the trees, and my truck's headlights barely cut through it. I'd gotten the call 3 hours ago. A geological survey team had gone missing in the old mine up there. 3 days without contact. I knew that mine well. Too well. My grandfather died in those tunnels back in 1907, crushed in the Monongah disaster. My father worked there until it shut down in 1955, came home every night, black with coal dust and wheezing. He always said the mountain had hungry ghosts, but I never believed in that stuff. Science and safety regulations, that's what mattered. The abandoned mining complex sat at 2,400 feet elevation, 15 miles from the nearest town. Most folks avoided the place. The company that owned it went bankrupt after too many black lung lawsuits, and the government was trying to clean up the mess they left behind. Strip-mined slopes, poisoned water, ground that could cave in without warning. It was a death trap. I parked my truck next to the main entrance and grabbed my equipment. Hard hat, safety rope, methane detector, emergency radio, standard search and rescue gear. The missing team was led by Dr. Patricia Wells, a geology professor from the State University. Smart woman, experienced with dangerous terrain. If she was in trouble, it was serious trouble. The mine entrance yawned like a black mouth in the mountainside. Rusted metal signs warned of danger in faded letters. I clicked on my flashlight and checked my methane detector. The readings looked normal, but something felt wrong. The air was too still, too quiet. Even the birds' had stopped singing. I'd been in hundreds of abandoned mines, but this one always made my skin crawl. The local Cherokee had stories about this place, said it was cursed ground, a place where the dead couldn't rest. My wife Martha laughed when I told her that, but she never came up here with me. Inside the entrance, I found the first sign of the missing team. Dr. Wells' equipment was scattered near the mouth of the main tunnel. Sample bags, rock hammers, core drilling gear. But it wasn't scattered randomly. Someone had arranged it in a pattern, almost like a warning, or a barrier. I picked up one of the sample bags and shined my light on it. Fresh coal dust, still damp. That was impossible. This mine had been closed for 12 years. Nothing down here should be fresh. My radio crackled with static. Sam, you copy? This is base. I'm here, Joe. Found their equipment. Looks like they went deeper into the mine. Be careful in there. Weather's getting worse. We might lose radio contact. I clipped the radio back to my belt and followed the main tunnel deeper into the mountain. My footsteps echoed strangely, like there was someone walking behind me. But every time I turned around, the tunnel was empty. The temperature dropped as I went deeper. My breath came out in white puffs, and my hands started to shake. Not from cold, from something else. something that made my grandfather's stories echo in my memory. 20 minutes in, I found boot prints in the mud, fresh ones leading toward the flooded section of the mine. But according to the maps, that area had been underwater for years. The pumps had failed in 1962, and the whole lower level was supposed to be a lake. I reached the edge of what should have been the flood zone and stopped dead. The water was gone. 20 feet of tunnel that should have been underwater stretched ahead of me, bone dry except for puddles of blah. Chalk water. The walls were covered in fresh scrape marks like something had clawed its way out. That's when I heard it. A rhythmic hammering sound, echoing from deep in the mine. Tap, tap, tap. Pause. Tap, tap, tap. My blood turned to ice water. I knew that sound from my childhood, the sound my grandfather said the Tommy knockers made to warn miners of danger. But Tommy knockers were just stories, weren't they? I followed the hammering sound deeper into the mine, my flashlight beam dancing across the wet stone walls. The sound came in bursts, 3 sharp taps, then silence, then 3 more. It was coming from somewhere ahead, in the section where the 1943 cave-in had happened. My methane detector should have been screaming warnings by now, but it showed safe levels. That made no sense. I could smell the gas, sharp and rotten in the air. Either my equipment was broken, or something down here was messing with it. The main tunnel split into 3 branches. I chose the middle one, following the boot prints. They were clearer now, size 10 work boots, the kind surveyors wore. But mixed in with them were older prints, boots with a different tread pattern. Much older. I'd gone maybe 50 yards when my flashlight started to flicker. Brand new batteries, but the beam was getting weaker. I smacked it against my palm and it brightened for a moment, then dimmed again. In that moment of brightness, I saw something that made my heart stop. An old mining cart sat on the tracks ahead of me. It was full of fresh coal, black chunks that gleamed wetly in my fading light. The cart hadn't been there 30 years ago when I'd first explored these tunnels as a kid. It definitely hadn't been there last month when I'd done the quarterly safety inspection. I approached the cart slowly. The coal was real. I picked up a piece and felt its weight, smelled its dusty scent. But how? This section of mine had been stripped clean decades ago. A sound made me spin around. Footsteps coming from behind me. Heavy work boots on stone. I called out, "Hello? Dr. Wells? Is that you?" The footstep, P.S. stopped. My voice echoed back from the darkness, distorted and strange. Then I heard something that made my knees go weak. "Get out!" The voice was rough, like a man who'd breathed too much coal dust. "Get out while you can." I swept my flashlight beam around the tunnel, but saw nothing. "Who's there?" "I'm here to help." "Are you with the survey team?" No answer. Just the drip of water and that damned hammering sound getting louder. I forced myself to keep moving. The tunnel curved to the right and I found myself in a wider chamber. This was where the 1943 accident had happened, where 17 miners had been trapped when the roof came down. Their bodies were never recovered. In the center of the chamber, I found something that made my blood freeze. Jim Morrison, one of Dr. Wells's survey assistants, was lying on his back under a pile of rocks. Dead. His hard hat was cracked open, blood pooled beneath his head, but the rocks hadn't fallen from above. They'd been thrown upward, smashing him from below. That was impossible. Physics didn't work that way. I knelt beside him and checked for a pulse, knowing I wouldn't find one. His skin was already cold. He'd been dead for hours, maybe days. His safety equipment had been torn off and scattered around the chamber. No accident did that. "Jim Morrison," I said into my radio. "I found Jim Morrison. He's dead, Joe." Static answered me. I was too deep in the mine for radio contact. A scraping sound made me look up. In the darkness beyond my flashlight beam, something was moving. Something big, dragging itself across the stone floor. The sound was wet and wrong, like meat being pulled across sandpaper. I stood up fast and backed toward the tunnel entrance. "Who's there? Show yourself." The scraping stopped. The silence was worse than the noise. Then I saw her, Lisa Park, the team's junior geologist, crawling toward me from the back of the chamber. Her clothes were torn, her face was white as paper, and her eyes were too wide, like she'd seen something no human should see. "Lisa!" I ran to her and helped her sit up. "What happened? Where's Dr. Wells?" She grabbed my arm with fingers like ice. "They're still working," she whispered. "They never stopped working. They said we had to help them." "Who said that? Where's the rest of your team?" She pointed toward a dark opening in the chamber wall, a tunnel I'd never seen before, even though I'd been in this chamber dozens of times. "They took Robert down there, to the deep place. They said the mountain was going to fall, and they needed more hands." Her grip tightened on my arm. "Sam, there are people down there, dead people. But they're still mining, still digging. They've been digging for 20 years. I helped her to her feet. She was shaking so hard she could barely stand. "Lisa, we need to get you out of here. You're in shock." "No!" She pulled away from me. "You don't understand. They're trying to save us. All of us. The whole valley. They said if they stop working, if they stop holding it up." She gestured toward the ceiling. "It all comes down. Everything comes down." I looked where she was pointing and felt my stomach drop. Fresh cracks ran across the chamber ceiling, spreading outward like spider webs. They weren't there the last time I'd been in this chamber. The mountain was shifting, settling, finding new ways to collapse. The hammering sound started again, coming from the dark tunnel Lisa had pointed to. But now it wasn't just one hammer. It was dozens, working in rhythm, echoing through the stone like a heartbeat. "They want to talk to you," Lisa said. Her voice was getting stronger, but her eyes were still wrong. "They know who you are, Sam. They know your family, your grandfather, your father. They remember." A light appeared in the dark tunnel. Not electric light, something older, softer, like a candle or an oil lamp, the kind of light miners used before electric safety lamps. And carrying that light, walking toward us with slow, steady steps, was a man in mining clothes. Old-fashioned clothes, the kind my grandfather wore in the photos on our mantelpiece. The man's face was pale and drawn, covered in coal dust. When he smiled, his teeth were black. "Samuel Coleridge," he said, and his voice echoed from everywhere and nowhere. "We've been waiting for you." The dead miner stepped into my flashlight beam, and I got my first clear look at him. His name tag read T. Kowalski, shift foreman, in faded letters. His work clothes were from the 1940s, canvas overalls, thick leather boots, a cloth cap instead of a hard hat. Coal dust was ground so deep into his skin it looked like tattoos. But it was his eyes that made me want to run. They glowed with the same soft light as his lamp, and when he looked at me, I felt like he could see right through to my bones. "Don't be afraid, boy," Kowalski said. "Your grandpappy used to work with me. Good man, Joe Coleridge. Died too young in that Monongah business." He shook his head sadly. "But he's not here. This is our mountain, our mine. We died here, so we stay here." Lisa grabbed my arm again. "He's been trying to explain it to us. They all have. There are 17 of them, the ones who died in the cave-in. They've been working down there ever since, holding up the mountain." "That's impossible," I said, but my voice shook. Everything about this was impossible, but it was happening anyway. Kowalski laughed, a sound like rocks grinding together. "Impossible? Boy, you're standing in a flooded mine that ain't flooded anymore, talking to a dead man, and you're worried about impossible?" He gestured toward the dark tunnel behind him. "Come see what we've been doing. Come see what's coming if we stop." Against every instinct screaming in my head, I followed him. Lisa stayed close beside me, and I could feel her trembling. The tunnel sloped downward, deeper into the mountain than any mining operation should have gone. The walls were different here, not carved by machines, but worn smooth by decades of hand tools. We emerged into a vast chamber I'd never seen on any mine survey. It stretched away beyond the reach of our lights, filled with the sound of working. Hammers striking stone, shovels scraping, the creak and groan of wooden supports being fitted into place. And everywhere, moving through the darkness like pale ghosts, were the miners. 17 men in old work clothes, their faces gray with coal dust and death. Some carried the flickering oil lamps, others worked in complete darkness. They moved with purpose, shoring up weak spots in the ceiling, clearing rubble from cave-ins that seemed to happen constantly. In the center of the chamber, Dr. Patricia Wells sat on a wooden crate, drawing furiously in a notebook. Her hair was white with stone dust, and her eyes had the same too-wide look as Lisa's. When she saw me, she jumped up and ran over. "Sam, thank God you're here. You have to see what they've shown me." She thrust the notebook at me. The pages were covered with geological diagrams, charts showing rock formations and stress points. The whole mountain is unstable. Has been since the original mining operation. These men, they died trying to prevent a catastrophic collapse, and they're still trying. I looked at the diagrams. My father had taught me enough about mining to understand the basics, and what I saw made my blood run cold. The mountain was like a house of cards, held up by a few critical support points. If those supports failed... "The town," I whispered. "Hillcrest Valley, 12,000 people. More now," Dr. Wells said. "The new housing development, the shopping center. They built right on top of the most unstable ground." She pointed to a spot on her diagram. "If this section gives way, the entire mountainside comes down. It'll bury the whole valley." Tommy Kowalski appeared beside us, moving without a sound. "We've been holding it up for 24 years, Coleridge, working every day, every night. But we're getting tired, dead tired." He smiled at his own joke. "We need help, living help." "What kind of help?" "Your friend Robert is learning," he said, pointing toward the far end of the chamber. In the distance, I could see a figure working alongside the ghostly miners, moving rocks and setting timber supports. Even from here, I could tell it was Robert Cross, the third member of the survey team. He was alive, but something about the way he moved wasn't quite right. "He volunteered," Lisa said quietly, "after they showed him what would happen if the mountain falls. He said he had to help." I walked toward Robert, and with each step the temperature seemed to drop. The living man was working with mechanical precision, his movements matching the rhythm of the dead miners around him. When I got close enough to see his face, I gasped. His eyes were the same pale, glowing color as the spirits. His skin had taken on a grayish tint. He was still alive. I could see him breathing, but he was changing, becoming something between living and dead. "Robert," I called to him. "Robert, we need to go, now." He looked at me with those strange, glowing eyes. "Can't leave, Sam. Too important. If I stop working, if any of us stop working..." He gestured toward the ceiling where fresh cracks were spreading across the stone. "You see? You understand?" As if to prove his point, a section of the ceiling about 20 feet away suddenly cracked and dropped chunks of rock. 3 of the dead miners immediately moved to the spot, working together to shore it up with timber supports that appeared from nowhere. Within minutes, the damage was repaired. But I noticed something else. One of the dead miners, a young man who couldn't have been more than 19 when he died, flickered and grew fainter as he worked. And the effort of holding up the mountain was wearing them down, making them less substantial. "They're fading," I said to Dr. Wells. "The spirits, they won't be able to keep this up forever." "That's why they need us," she said. "Living people have more substance, more power to affect the physical world. But the cost..." She looked toward Robert, who was now almost as pale as the dead miners around him. "The cost is becoming like them, trapped here forever." Tommy Kowalski materialized beside me again. "Not forever, boy, just until the mountain finds its balance. Could be years, could be decades, could be centuries." He shrugged. "Time moves different when you're dead." A rumbling sound filled the chamber. Not the sound of working, but the deep grinding noise of massive stones shifting against each other. The mountain was moving, settling, looking for a place to fall. "It's getting worse," Dr. Wells said, her voice tight with fear. "The development on the surface, all that new weight, it's accelerating the process. We have maybe hours before critical failure. The dead miners had stopped working and were looking at us expectantly. In the distance, Robert continued his mechanical labor, but his movements were getting slower, more ghostly. "You have to choose," Kowalski said. His voice echoed from every wall of the chamber. "Join us willingly. Help us hold up the mountain, save the valley, or watch 12,000 people die when it all comes down." Lisa grabbed my hand. "There has to be another way, Sam. There has to be." But as another section of ceiling cracked and showered us with debris, I began to understand that some choices weren't really choices at all. They were just different kinds of sacrifice. And somewhere far above us, in the valley below the mountain, 12,000 people were going about their lives, completely unaware that their existence balanced on the edge of a pickaxe, held up by the tireless labor of 17 dead miners and one living man who was slowly becoming a ghost himself. The hammering resumed, more urgent now, echoing, G through the chamber like a countdown. The mountain shuddered, and this time the rumble lasted for 30 seconds. Dust rained down from the ceiling, and several of the dead miners flickered like candle flames in the wind. I could feel the instability in my bones, thousands of tons of rock shifting, looking for a way to fall. "Sam!" My radio crackled to life with Captain Joe Murphy's voice. "Sam, do you copy? We're getting seismic readings up here. The whole mountain's moving." I grabbed the radio. "Joe, listen to me carefully. You need to evacuate Hillcrest Valley. Right now. Get everyone out." "What are you talking about? Sam, where are you?" "There's going to be a landslide. A big one. The whole mountainside is going to come down." Static filled the radio. Then Joe's voice came back, faint and breaking up. "Sam, can barely hear you. Getting a rescue team. Your boy Billy is with us." Billy, my 18-year-old son, up there with the rescue team. The thought hit me like a physical blow. If this mountain came down, it wouldn't just bury the valley. It would kill my boy. Tommy Kowalski stood beside me, his pale face grim. "We can't hold it much longer, Coleridge. Look around you." I looked. The dead miners were fading, becoming more transparent with each passing minute. Their work was wearing them down to nothing. Robert was barely visible now, his living energy almost completely drained by the supernatural labor. "The living have more power," Dr. Wells said, "but it costs them their lives. The dead have less power, but they can work longer. That's why the balance is so delicate." Another rumble shook the chamber. This time, a whole section of the ceiling came down, crashing where we'd been standing just moments before. The dead miners rushed to shore up the damage, but I could see it was hopeless. There were too many weak points, too much instability. Might be another way, I said, thinking out loud. What if we combine modern engineering with this? I gestured toward the ghostly miners. Steel supports, concrete reinforcement, but placed where the spirits know they're needed most. Kowalski shook his head. "Takes time to bring in equipment, boy. Time we don't have. This mountain's coming down in the next hour, maybe less." "Then we buy that time," I said. "I'll stay. I'll help you hold it up long enough for the evacuation and the engineers." "Sam, no!" Lisa grabbed my arm. "You see what it did to Robert. You'll die down here." "Maybe. But if I don't try, everyone dies up there." Dr. Wells was scribbling frantically in her notebook. "Actually, Sam might be right. If we can stabilize the critical support points for just a few hours, buy enough time to get heavy equipment up here, it could work." The radio crackled again. "Sam, this is Billy. Dad, where are you? We're coming down." My heart nearly stopped. "Billy, stay back. Do not come into this mine." "Too late, Dad. We're already in the main tunnel." I looked at Kowalski. "How long do we have?" "Maybe 30 minutes before total collapse, maybe less." I made my decision. "Dr. Wells, Lisa, get out of here. Take Robert if you can carry him. Get topside and tell them exactly where to place the steel supports." I handed her my radio. "Use this to guide the engineering team." "What about you?" Lisa asked. "I'm staying. Someone has to help them hold it up." I walked toward the center of the chamber where the dead miners had gathered. They watched me approach with glowing eyes, their faces solemn. "I'm not ready to die," I told them. "But I'm ready to work." Kowalski smiled, showing those black teeth. "That's all we ask, boy. Just work alongside us. Hold up what we can't hold alone." I picked up a timber support, solid wood that felt real in my hands, and moved toward the most critical stress point. The moment I started working, I felt the change begin. Cold spread through my body, and my vision started to shift. I could see the mountains structure now, the way the dead miners saw it. Every crack, every weak point, every place where the rock wanted to give way. The work was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. My muscles moved with supernatural strength, but I could feel my life energy draining away with each timber I set, each stone I moved. The boundary between living and dead was blurring. Above us I heard voices, Billy and the rescue team, getting closer. "Work faster," Kowalski urged. "Your boy's life depends on it now, too." We worked like men possessed. And maybe we were. The dead miners and I moved in perfect coordination, shoring up weak points faster than they could develop. But I was fading fast, becoming more like them with each passing minute. Billy's voice echoed from the tunnel entrance. "Dad, I can see light down here." "Stay back," I shouted, but my voice sounded strange now, hollow like the dead miners' voices. Then Billy appeared at the chamber entrance, flashlight in hand, Captain Murphy right behind him. They stopped dead when they saw us, me working alongside 17 ghostly figures, all of us moving with the same mechanical precision. "Jesus Christ," Murphy whispered. "Sam, what is this?" "Daddy?" Billy's voice was small, scared. "Dad, your eyes." I looked at my reflection in a puddle of water. My eyes were beginning to glow with that same pale light. "Get out of here, son," I said. "Get everyone out. We'll hold it as long as we can." But even as I spoke, I knew we were losing the battle. The mountain was too unstable, the damage too extensive. More sections of ceiling were cracking, and the dead miners were becoming so faint I could barely see them. Then Dr. Wells' voice crackled over Murphy's radio. "Steel supports are here. Engineering team is setting up at coordinates I'm transmitting now." Above us I heard the sound of heavy machinery, drilling equipment, port vehicles, the organized chaos of an emergency engineering operation. "Just a few more minutes," I told the dead miners. "Just hold it a few more minutes." But I was barely holding myself together. The supernatural work was consuming me, turning me into something between living and dead. I could feel my humanity slipping away with each breath. Tommy Kowalski appeared beside me one last time. "It's working, boy. The steel supports are taking the load. We can let go now." The dead miners stopped working and stepped back. For a moment I thought the mountain would come crashing down, but the ceiling held. The steel supports that Dr. Wells had guided into place were doing their job, taking the weight that the spirits had carried for 24 years. I collapsed to my knees, exhausted beyond measure. But I was still alive, still human. The glow was fading from my eyes. "The mountain's stable," Dr. Wells' voice came over the radio. "Seismic readings are normalizing. We did it." Billy ran to me and helped me stand. "Dad, are you okay?" I looked around the chamber. The dead miners were still there, but they were smiling now. Their long vigil was over. "We can rest now," Kowalski said. "Finally rest." One by one, the spirits faded away, their work complete at last. In moments, only Robert and I remained in the chamber, both of us alive but forever changed by what we'd experienced. 3 months later, I stood at the entrance to Devil's Backbone Mine, watching the final steel beam being installed. The engineering team had worked around the clock to reinforce every critical support point that Dr. Wells had identified. The mountain was stable now, as stable as human engineering could make it. But I knew the real truth. The spirits were still here, still watching, still ready to work if the need arose. I could feel them sometimes, especially on quiet nights when the wind moved through the tunnels. They weren't gone. They were just resting. Robert Cross had recovered physically, but like me, he was changed. We both saw things differently now, understood this. A thin line between the living world and whatever lay beyond it. The survey team's final report mentioned geological instability and successful engineering solutions. It didn't mention the 17 dead miners who'd saved 12,000 lives. Some truths were too strange for official reports. I'd been promoted to Chief of Mining Safety for the entire state, with a special focus on abandoned mine sites. My first recommendation was a comprehensive survey of every major mining disaster site in West Virginia. If Devil's Backbone had active spirits, others might too. Dr. Wells published groundbreaking research on geological prediction methods, though she never explained how she'd developed such accurate instincts for finding critical stress points. Lisa Park had transferred to a desk job and refused to go underground ever again. I didn't blame her. My family had struggled with the changes in me. Martha knew something had happened in that mine, something that had marked me in ways I couldn't explain. Billy watched me carefully, as if afraid I might fade away like the spirits had. My younger sons treated me with a new kind of respect, sensing that their father had walked in places most people never went. Once a month, I went back to Devil's Backbone. Not for inspections or official business, for maintenance of a different kind. I'd sit in the main chamber where we'd fought to save the mountain, and I'd listen. Sometimes I heard the soft echo of hammers working in distant tunnels. Sometimes I heard voices discussing the condition of support timbers or the stability of rock formations. The dead miners weren't gone. They were just at rest, ready to work again if the mountain needed them. On my last visit, Tommy Kowalski had appeared one final time, still wearing his old mining clothes but looking more peaceful than before. "Thank you, boy," he'd said, "for finishing what that we started, for making sure nobody forgot." "Will you be all right now?" I'd asked. He'd smiled that black-toothed smile. "We're miners, Coleridge. We work until the job is done. Job's done now, thanks to you and that steel. But if the mountain ever needs us again..." He'd shrugged. "We'll be here." I'd left him there in the darkness, him and his 16 companions, eternally ready to hold up the world if it started to fall. The official story was simpler. Geological instability detected and corrected through advanced engineering techniques. A success story of modern science preventing natural disaster. But I knew better. And sometimes, late at night when I drove past Devil's Backbone on my way home from work, I'd see a soft glow deep in the mountain, the light of old mining lamps, carried by men who'd chosen to work forever rather than let innocent people die. The mountain was quiet now, stable and safe. The town below thrived, its people unaware of how close they'd come to disaster. New houses were built, children played in yards that had almost been buried under tons of rock, and somewhere in the darkness beneath their feet, 17 miners continued their eternal watch, ready to pick up their tools if the mountain ever started to fall again. Some debts echo through generations. Some sacrifices never end. But as long as there were people willing to work alongside the dead when the living world needed saving, maybe that was okay. Maybe that was how it was supposed to be. I drove home through the mountain fog, knowing that tomorrow I'd inspect another abandoned mine, looking for other spirits who might need help finishing jobs they'd started decades ago. It wasn't the career I'd planned when I first put on a ranger's uniform, but it was the work I'd been born to do. Keeping watch over the places where the living and the dead shared the same dangerous ground, making sure nobody was forgotten, and nobody worked alone. The mountains were full of stories. Most of them were true, and some of them were still happening. My name is Jake Stillwater, and I'm about to tell you something that'll make you think I've lost my mind. I've been a forest ranger for 12 years now, working the deep mountains of North Carolina. I know these woods better than most folks know their own backyards. But what happened to me last August changed everything I thought I knew about my family and these mountains. See, my grandfather was Lightning Stillwater, the most famous moonshiner in these parts back in the day. He ran the biggest still operation in the Blue Ridge Mountains until he died in 1962. Growing up, I heard all his stories about holler spirits and mountain magic, but I never believed a word of it. That's probably why I became a federal agent, to make up for all the laws my family broke. The call came in on a Tuesday morning. Someone had reported a working moonshine operation up in Grandfather's old hollow, the same place that hadn't seen a soul in 9 years. My boss handed me the case file with a grin. "Stillwater, looks like you get to arrest some of your own family," he said. I didn't find it funny. I'd spent my whole career trying to prove I wasn't like them. The drive up the mountain took 2 hours on roads that got smaller and smaller until they weren't really roads at all. The last 22 miles were nothing but dirt tracks and creek beds. My radio started cutting out about halfway up. By the time I reached the hollow, I was completely alone. The place looked exactly like I remembered from childhood visits. A narrow valley between steep ridges, thick with rhododendron bushes and old oak trees. A clear spring bubbled up from the rocks at the far end. But something felt wrong the moment I stepped out of my truck. The silence was too complete. No birds singing, no insects buzzing, no squirrels chattering in the trees. Just my footsteps crunching on dead leaves and my own breathing, echoing off the ridge walls. I followed the old path toward where Grandfather's still used to be, expecting to find some half-broken equipment and maybe a few beer cans left by teenagers. What I found instead made me stop dead in my tracks. The still was running. Not just running, it was perfect. Copper pipes gleamed like they'd been polished yesterday. Steam rose from the mash barrels in neat straight lines. The familiar sweet smell of corn liquor hung heavy in the air. But there were no footprints anywhere, no tire tracks, no sign that anyone had been here in years. I pulled out my radio and tried to call it in, but all I got was static. The temperature around the still felt 20 degrees cooler than the rest of the hollow, even though the sun was beating down on everything else. That's when I heard it. A low whistle, barely audible at first. It was a tune I knew. One grandfather used to whistle while he worked. The same tune, note for note. My hands started shaking as I drew my service weapon and called out, "Federal agent, show yourself!" The whistling stopped. The silence that followed was worse than the sound itself. I spent the next hour searching every inch of that hollow, but I found nothing. No one. The still kept bubbling away like it was running itself, which should have been impossible. I'd seen plenty of moonshine operations during my career, and they all needed constant attention. Someone had to tend the fire, check the temperature, adjust the flow. This one was running perfectly with nobody around. I decided to take some pictures for evidence, but when I looked through the camera, something was off. Instead of showing the modern still I was looking at, the viewfinder showed grainy black and white images like old photographs. I could see people in the pictures, men in overalls and floppy hats working around the equipment. But when I lowered the cam, there was nobody there. My hands were really shaking now. I tried the radio again, but instead of static, I heard jazz music, the old-timey kind from the 1920s. A woman's voice was singing about moonlight and dancing, crackling through the speaker like it was coming from very far away. I walked over to one of the barrels and dipped my finger in the mash. It tasted exactly like Grandfather's recipe. I'd know that flavor anywhere from the sips he used to give me when I was little. But Grandfather had been dead for 9 years. His recipe died with him. That's when I noticed the bottles. They were lined up on a wooden shelf I hadn't seen before, each one marked with a symbol carved into the glass. Lightning bolts, Grandfather's signature mark. Fresh bottles, like they'd just been filled. I picked one up, and it was still warm from the still. The cork came out with a soft pop, and the smell hit me like a punch to the gut. It was perfect corn liquor, smooth and strong, aged just right. I took a small taste. You learn to test moonshine when you're a federal agent, and nearly dropped the bottle. It was identical to the batch Grandfather had made for my 18th birthday, the last liquor he ever produced before he died. I still had some of that bottle at home, and this tasted exactly the same. "Impossible," I whispered. "Nothing's impossible in these mountains, Jake boy." I spun around, gun raised, heart hammering. There was nobody behind me, but I knew that voice. "Grandfather?" My voice cracked like a teenager's. The temperature dropped another 10 degrees. My breath started fogging in the suddenly cold air. The leaves on the trees began rustling even though there was no wind. "Been waiting for you to come home," the voice said. It seemed to come from everywhere at once. The trees, the rocks, the still itself. "Time you learned the family business." I backed away from the still, weapon still drawn, even though I knew bullets wouldn't help me here. "You're dead. I was at your funeral." A shape began forming in the mist, rising from the mash barrels. Tall, thin, wearing the old overalls and hat I remembered. But I could see right through him to the trees beyond. "Death ain't the end of everything, son. Some promises go deeper than the grave." Lightning Stillwater, my grandfather, stood before me as clear as day and transparent as glass. He looked exactly like he had the day he died, down to the gap between his front teeth and the scar on his left hand from a still explosion in 1943. "This isn't real," I said, more to myself than to him. "Heat exhaustion. That's all this is." Grandfather laughed, and the sound echoed through the hollow like thunder. "Feel that cold air? You think heat makes you cold, boy?" He was right. The temperature around the still was now at least 30 degrees lower than the rest of the hollow. I could see my breath clearly. "Why are you here?" I managed to ask. "Same reason I always was, making liquor, keeping the old agreements." His transparent eyes fixed on mine. "Question is, why are you here? Come to arrest your own grandfather?" I kept the gun pointed at him, even though my hands were shaking so hard I could barely hold it. "I came to shut down an illegal operation." "Illegal?" Grandfather's laugh turned bitter. "Boy, we've been making liquor in this hollow since before there was any government to say it was illegal. We got agreements older than any law you carry." Agreements with who? But even as I asked the question, I started hearing them. Other voices coming from the trees around the hollow. Men's voices speaking in low tones, discussing mash recipes and barrel aging. I recognized some of them. Uncle Pete, who died in 1958. Great-uncle Caleb, killed in a federal raid in 1932. Cousin Jeremiah, who disappeared in these mountains in 1947. They were all here. All the dead Stillwaters, working the family still like they'd never left. Agreements with the mountains themselves, Graham and Father said. With the spirits that been here since before the Cherokee. We make the liquor, they keep the peace. Everyone benefits. More shapes began forming in the mist. A whole crew of transparent moonshiners going about their work. I watched Uncle Pete check the temperature of a mash barrel. Great-uncle Caleb adjusted the flow through a copper coil. They moved like they were still alive, still working, still carrying on the family tradition. This is insane, I whispered. Is it? Grandfather stepped closer, and the cold intensified. Or is it just something your government schooling never taught you? Some things are bigger than federal law, Jake boy. Some promises can't be broken by death. That's when I heard the other sound. Footsteps crunching through the woods behind me. Heavy boots, moving fast, getting closer. I turned around, gun still drawn, and saw something that made my blood freeze. It was a man in an old-fashioned suit and tie, carrying a badge and a Thompson submachine gun. His face was pale as moonlight, his eyes black as empty sockets. He walked through the trees like he owned them, heading straight for the still. Federal agents, Grandfather spat. They've been coming here for 40 years, trying to stop what can't be stopped. Look what it got them. The ghostly agent raised his weapon, pointing it directly at me. His mouth opened, but no words came out. Just a hollow, whistling sound like wind through a cave. Agent Thomas McCarthy, Grandfather said. Died right where you're standing in 1929, still trying to make his arrest. More shapes appeared behind McCarthy. Other dead federal agents, all carrying guns, all moving toward me with the same hollow-eyed stare. They can't leave either, Grandfather explained. Killed while breaking the old agreements. Now they're trapped here forever, trying to do a job that should never have been started. I was surrounded. Dead moonshiners on one side, dead federal agents on the other, and me caught in the middle with no way out. The shooting started a few seconds later. The bullets passed right through the ghost agents and slammed into trees behind them, splintering bark and sending wood chips flying everywhere. I dove behind one of the mash barrels as gunfire erupted all around me. Thompson submachine guns from the 1920s firing at lever-action rifles from the same era. The living and the dead were fighting the same battle they'd been fighting for 40 years. I tried to run, but every path out of the hollow was blocked by more spirits. They kept appearing, federal agents from different decades, some in suits, some in military gear, some I didn't recognize. All of them armed, all of them shooting at the moonshiner ghosts, who fired back with equal fury. "Can't leave now, Jake boy," Grandfather called out over the gunfire. "You're part of this whether you like it or not." A bullet whined over my head and I pressed myself lower behind the barrel. The smell of gunpowder mixed with the sweet scent of corn mash, creating a smell that made me sick to my stomach. "What do you want from me?" I shouted. "Join the family business," Grandfather replied. "Honor the old agreements. It's the only way to make this stop." But even as he said it, I could tell he was getting weaker. His transparent form was becoming more faint, like he was using all his energy to maintain the battle. The other moonshiner spirits were fading too, while the federal agents seemed to be getting stronger. That's when I realized what was happening. Every time a federal agent died in this hollow, they joined the supernatural law enforcement team trying to shut down the operation. But every time they killed a moonshiner, they just made the situation worse. The spirits of the dead agents were stuck here, unable to complete their mission, unable to leave, getting more and more frustrated as the decades passed. And now they saw me as their chance to finally succeed. Agent McCarthy stepped through, at the gunfire like it couldn't touch him. His hollow eyes fixed on me, and he raised that old Thompson gun. When he spoke, his voice sounded like it was coming from the bottom of a deep well. "Federal Agent Stillwater." Each word was a struggle, like he was remembering how to talk. "You will help us end this." "I'm not helping anybody," I yelled back. "I just want to get out of here." "No. Leaving," McCarthy said. "Join us, or die, like the others." That's when I saw them. The bodies. They were scattered around the hollow, hidden behind trees and rocks where I hadn't noticed them before. Federal agents from different time periods, all dead, all killed while trying to shut down the operation. Some looked fresh, like they'd died recently. Others were just bones in rotted uniforms. 23 bodies. I counted them while dodging gunfire. 23 federal agents who'd come to this hollow over the past 40 years and never left. "Jesus," I whispered. "He ain't got no power here," Grandfather called out. "This is older magic, boy. Mountain magic, Cherokee magic, blood magic." The shooting stopped suddenly, and the silence was worse than the noise had been. Both sides of ghosts stood staring at me, waiting for me to make a choice. "The mountain spirits require payment," Grandfather explained. "Liquor offerings to keep them peaceful. We've been making those offerings for over 100 years. When Prohibition started and the federal agents began killing moonshiners, they disrupted the old agreements. Now the spirits are angry." "What kind of payment?" I asked, though I was afraid I already knew. "Blood," said a new voice. I turned to see another spirit materializing. This one was different from the others. Older, wearing buckskins and feathers instead of overalls. His face was painted with red and black designs, and his eyes held an ancient knowledge that made me feel like a child. "Cherokee medicine man," Grandfather explained. "He made the original agreement with our family in 1847. The medicine man stepped forward, and both the tears. Moonshiner spirits and the federal agent spirits backed away from him. Even McCarthy lowered his weapon. "White man's law disrupted the balance," the Cherokee spirit said. "Mountain spirits grow hungry. They demand payment in blood to restore the peace." "Whose blood?" I asked, though I was pretty sure I knew the answer. "Stillwater blood," the medicine man replied. "Original agreement was with your bloodline. Must be renewed by your bloodline." I looked around at the dead agents scattered throughout the hollow. What about them? They've been paying in blood for 40 years. Wrong blood, the medicine man said simply. They are not part of the agreement. Their deaths only make the spirits angrier. Grandfather nodded sadly. That's why they can't leave, Jake boy. That's why they keep coming. The spirits won't accept their sacrifice because they weren't part of the original deal. Only Stillwater blood can restore the balance. So you want me to kill myself to fix this? Not kill, the Cherokee spirit corrected. Serve. Make the offerings. Keep the old ways. Live here. Work here. Honor the agreements your ancestors made. I looked at the ghost of Agent McCarthy, still holding his weapon, still staring at me with those hollow eyes. And if I don't? Then we kill you, McCarthy said in his hollow voice. And you join us, forever hunting moonshiners we can never catch, forever trying to complete a mission that can never be completed. But if you do join us, Grandfather added, if you honor the family tradition, then the spirits will be satisfied. The old agreements will be renewed. The dead agents can finally rest in peace. I was trapped. Join my criminal family's supernatural moonshine operation or become a ghost cop forever hunting criminals I could never catch. Some choice. That's when I heard the engines. Vehicles were coming up the mountain road, multiple vehicles moving fast. My backup had finally arrived. The spirits heard it too. The moonshiner ghosts began fading back into the mist, while the federal agent spirits raised their weapons. Again. Agent McCarthy's hollow eyes blazed with new intensity. More agents, he whispered. More blood for the mountain. No, I shouted, but it was too late. My radio crackled to life for the first time all day. Ranger Stillwater, this is Agent Santos with the DEA tactical team. We're 2 minutes from your location. What's your status? I grabbed the radio. Stay back. Do not enter the hollow. But the radio went dead again, and I could hear the vehicles getting closer. They were about to drive into a supernatural war zone, and they had no idea what was waiting for them. The first DEA truck roared into the hollow just as the sun began setting behind the ridge. Agent Maria Santos jumped out of the passenger seat with her weapon drawn, followed by 6 tactical officers in full gear. Federal agents, she shouted. Everyone on the ground now! But there was nobody visible to arrest. The spirits had all vanished the moment the living agents arrived, leaving only me standing next to the still with my hands raised. Stillwater, what the hell is going on up here? Santos demanded. We've been trying to reach you for hours. You need to get everyone out of here, I said quickly. Right now. This place is... That's when the temperature dropped 30 degrees in 3 seconds. Santos and her team started shivering immediately, their breath fogging in the suddenly freezing air. What the hell? One of the tactical officers muttered. The mist began rising from the ground around us, thick and unnatural. In seconds, visibility dropped to about 10 feet. I could hear Santos trying to use her radio, but all she got was that same 1920s jazz music I'd heard earlier. Equipment malfunction, she said. Johnson, try your radio. But Johnson's radio was playing the same music. So were all of them. That's when the spirits came back. They materialized out of the mist like something hing from a nightmare. Dozens of them, both moonshiners and federal agents, all armed, all staring at the new arrivals with hungry eyes. Santos tried to shoot the first ghost she saw, Agent McCarthy, but the bullets passed right through him and nearly hit one of her own men. McCarthy just smiled with his hollow mouth and raised his Thompson gun. New recruits, he whispered. The battle started again, but this time it was different. The living agents were caught in the crossfire between 2 groups of ghosts, and unlike the spirits, they could actually be hurt by the gunfire. Officer Johnson went down first, screaming as a rifle bullet from 1923 tore through his shoulder. Santos dragged him behind a tree and tried to return fire, but her bullets just passed harmlessly through the spirits. Stillwater, she shouted. What the hell are these things? Family business, I called back, diving behind the still as more gunfire erupted around us. That's when Grandfather appeared next to me, more solid than he'd been all day. Time to choose, Jake boy, he said. Your people are dying, and more will die unless you stop this. Another scream echoed through the hollow as Officer Martinez took a bullet in the leg. Santos was trying to treat two wounded men while returning fire at enemies she couldn't hit. It was hopeless. "What do I have to do?" I asked. "Join us. Become the new keeper of the still. Make the offerings the mountain spirits require. Honor the blood agreements your great-great-grandfather signed." "And if I do that, everyone goes free? The living agents can leave. The dead agents can finally rest. The mountain spirits will be satisfied." Grandfather's eyes grew sad. "But you'll have to stay. Forever. Tending the still, making the offerings, keeping the balance." Officer Williams screamed as ghostly gunfire found its mark. Santos was down to 3 men, and they wowed. "You're all wounded." "How do I know you're telling the truth?" "Because I've been trapped here for 9 years trying to keep the balance myself," Grandfather said. "But I'm getting weaker. The mountain spirits need a living Stillwater to renew the agreements. Without that, they'll keep killing federal agents until there are none left to send." Santos looked at me across the hollow. Blood was running down her face from a cut on her forehead. "Stillwater, help us!" I looked at the Cherokee medicine man, who nodded once. "The choice is yours," the spirit said. "But choose quickly. The mountain grows hungrier with each death." More gunfire, more screams. Officer Thompson collapsed with a bullet in his chest. I made my decision. "All right," I shouted, standing up in the middle of the gunfight. "I'll do it. I'll honor the agreements. Just stop the killing." The instant I said the words, everything changed. The gunfire stopped. The mist began to clear. The temperature rose back to normal. The spirits of the dead federal agents lowered their weapons and looked at me with something like relief in their hollow eyes. Agent McCarthy stepped forward and actually managed to smile. "Finally," he whispered. "Finally. We can rest." One by one, the ghostly federal agents began to fade away. Not disappearing, but becoming peaceful, their faces relaxing for the first time in decades. They nodded to me as they vanished, like they were thanking me for setting them free. The moonshiner spirits remained, but they were different now, calmer, more solid, like they had purpose again. "The agreements are renewed," the Cherokee medicine man said. "The balance is restored, but the price must be paid." I felt something change inside me, a connection to the land, to the still, to the mountain itself. I could sense the spirits moving through the hollow, no longer angry, no longer hungry. The old agreements were back in place. Santos and her surviving men stared at me in confusion. "Stillwater, what just happened here?" "Equipment malfunction," I said, using her own words. "The cold air probably caused some kind of group hallucination. You should get your wounded men to a hospital." She looked around the hollow, seeing only an abandoned still and some old equipment. The bodies of the dead agents were gone. They'd finally found peace. The supernatural battle was over, leaving only normal bullet holes in trees that could be explained away as target practice by local teenagers. "What about the still?" Santos asked. I walked over and kicked over one of the mash barrels, spilling its contents on the ground. "Abandoned operation. Looks like whoever was running it cleared out before we got here." But as I said it, I knew I was lying. The still would be running again tomorrow night, and the night after that, and every night for as long as I lived, because I was the new keeper of the old agreements. Santos looked confused, but didn't argue. She had wounded men to worry about and a long drive to the nearest hospital. Within an hour, all the living federal agents were gone, leaving me alone in the hollow with my new family of spirits. "You did the right thing, Jake boy," Grandfather said, becoming more solid as the last of the government vehicles disappeared down the mountain. "Did I? I just became a criminal." "You became a keeper of the balance," the Cherokee medicine man corrected. "Some laws are older than governments. Some promises matter more than careers." I looked around the hollow, my hollow now, and felt the weight of what I'd agreed to. I would live here, work here, tend the still, make the offerings. I would become what I'd spent my whole career fighting against. But 23 dead federal agents were finally at peace. Santos and her team would live to see their families again. And the mountain spirits were satisfied. Sometimes that has to be enough. That was 3 months ago. Officially, I requested a transfer to a fire lookout station in a raw, remote area of the Nantahala National Forest. My supervisor thought I needed some alone time after the equipment malfunction incident that left several DEA agents hospitalized. The official report blamed the injuries on a gas leak that caused hallucinations and friendly fire. Nobody asks too many questions about what happens in the deep mountains. I still have my federal job, technically. I file reports, maintain trail markers, watch for forest fires. But my real work happens at night, when the moon rises over the ridge and the spirits come out to work the family still. Grandfather taught me everything before he finally moved on to whatever comes after. How to tend the mash, how to read the mountain spirits' moods, how to make the blood offerings that keep the old agreements in place. It's not human blood they want, in case you're wondering. A few drops from a cut finger mixed into each batch is enough. The mountain spirits just want to know the Stillwater family remembers who they really serve. I make about 50 gallons a month, most of which gets poured out as offerings at specific spots throughout the hollow. I keep a few bottles for myself. The job gets lonely, and Grandfather's recipe is still the best moonshine I've ever tasted. Agent Santos visited me once, about a month after the incident. She claimed she was just checking on my welfare, but I could tell she remembered more than she was saying. She kept looking around the hollow like she expected to see something that wasn't there. "You ever think about that day?" she asked as we sat on my porch drinking coffee. "Which day?" "You know which day. The day my radio played jazz music and the temperature dropped 40 degrees for no reason." I shrugged. Mountain weather can be strange. Equipment malfunctions happen. She stared at me for a long time, then nodded. "Yeah, equipment malfunctions." But as she left, she said something that made me realize the old agreements affect more people than just my family. "Take care of yourself up here, Stillwater. And if you ever need backup, real backup, you call me. I don't care what the official reports say. I know something happened in that hollow, and I know you saved my life somehow." She never came back, but sometimes I get reports from other agents working in Appalachian regions. Stories about abandoned stills that run themselves, about ghostly figures in old-fashioned clothes, about federal raids that end in mysterious equipment failures and mass hallucinations. The Stillwater family wasn't the only one with agreements in these mountains. We were just the biggest operation. Last week, I got a letter from a DEA agent named Morrison working in eastern Kentucky. He'd heard about my expertise with mountain moonshiners and wanted advice about a case that was giving him trouble. He described finding a perfectly maintained still with no operators, bottles marked with strange symbols, and equipment that seemed to run on its own. I wrote back and told him to request a transfer. Some jobs aren't worth taking. I don't regret my choice exactly. The mountain spirits are peaceful now. No more federal agents die in my hollow. The old agreements are secure, but I do miss the outside world sometimes. I miss having conversations with people who are still breathing. I miss working cases where the biggest mystery was finding fingerprints, not negotiating with Cherokee medicine men who've been dead for 100 years. But this is my life now, keeper of the old agreements, guardian of the mountain spirits, the last federal agent to work these hollows who actually understands what he's protecting. Sometimes, when the moon is full and the mist rises from the valley floor, I see other spirits moving through the trees, not moonshiners or federal agents, but older things. Cherokee warriors, pioneer families, mountain folk who've been here since before anyone thought to make maps of these ridges. They all nod to me when they pass, acknowledging my role as keeper of the balance. I'm part of something bigger now, something that existed long before the federal government and will exist long after it's gone. The mountains remember everything. Every promise made, every agreement signed, every blood oath sworn by firelight in hidden hollows. My family's moonshine operation was just one thread in a web of supernatural contracts that keeps these mountains peaceful. And now I'm the one who makes sure that thread stays strong. If you're ever driving through the deep mountains of North Carolina and you see mist rising from a hidden hollow, if you smell the sweet scent of corn mash on the wind, If you hear the sound of someone whistling an old tune, just keep driving. Some family businesses should stay in the family. My name is Jake Stillwater, and this is my job now. Federal agent by day, moonshiner by night, keeper of agreements older than law itself. The mountain spirits are satisfied. For now, my name is David Kingfisher, and I've been a park ranger for 14 years. People call me Dave. I work in Shenandoah National Park, mostly in the wild areas where few folks venture. The mountains have always made more sense to me than people do. I grew up in a preacher's house. My daddy stood behind a pulpit every Sunday, shouting about sin and salvation while the congregation said, "Amen." But I saw what happened Monday through Saturday. I saw the deacons who cheated on their wives. I saw the church ladies who gossiped like vultures. I saw my own father count the offering money with greedy fingers. So I left all that behind. Found God in the trees instead of a building. The mountains don't lie. They don't pretend to be something they're not. It was August 1961 when Sheriff Collins called me. Hot as blazes, the kind of heat that makes your shirt stick to your back even in the shade. "Dave, I got a problem up on Old Rag Mountain," he said over the phone. "Campers been complaining about noise. Some kind of church service going on all night, every night for 3 weeks now, singing and carrying on." "What kind of church service?" I asked. "Snake handlers, from what I hear. You know how them mountain folk are. But it ain't legal to camp in that area, and the noise is driving paying customers crazy. Park Service needs to handle it." I knew the area he meant. A deep hollow about 12 miles from the nearest road, surrounded by rocky cliffs and thick laurel bushes. No churches up there, no buildings at all, far as I knew. "I'll head up tomorrow morning," I told him. "Appreciate it, Dave. Figured you'd understand their kind better than most, what with your background and all." He hung up before I could tell him I understood them all too well. That evening, I sat on my porch with my wife, Ruth. She was mending one of our daughter's dresses, her needle catching the last light of day. "Where are you headed tomorrow?" she asked without looking up. "Old Rag Hollow, some religious troublemakers." Ruth's hands stopped moving. "That's where the Stone congregation died." I'd heard the story. Back in 1897, a preacher named Ezekiel Stone led a snake-handling church up in that hollow. 47 people died during a service, poison in the communion wine. Federal agents investigating illegal religious practices, some folks said. Others claimed it was God's judgment. "That's just old mountain talk," I said. But Ruth kept staring at her sewing. "My grandmother always said you could still hear them singing up there. Said they died in the middle of worship, so they never stopped." I laughed, but it came out hollow. "You don't believe that nonsense." "I believe there's things in these mountains older than any of us understand." The next morning, I loaded my pack with the usual supplies: radio, first aid kit, citations book, service revolver. The hike to Old Rag Hollow takes most of a day, climbing over ridges and through thick forest. No easy path. The first strange thing I noticed was the silence. No birds singing, no insects buzzing. Even my boots on the trail seemed too loud. The deeper I went into the hollow, the quieter it got. Then I smelled it. Musky, thick, like a snake den, but stronger than any I'd ever encountered. By late afternoon, I reached the hollow, and there it was. A wooden church building stood in a small clearing, white paint gleaming like it was freshly applied. Tall windows, steep roof, bell tower reaching toward the sky. It looked exactly like every country church I'd known as a boy. But there shouldn't have been any building there. I'd studied every map of this area. No structures, no settlements, nothing. I approached carefully, checking the ground for footprints. Plenty of them, leading to and from the church. Men, women, children, all barefoot, like they were walking on holy ground. The front door stood open. Inside, I could see wooden pews arranged in perfect rows. Oil lamps flickered along the walls, though I couldn't figure out how they stayed lit. Fresh hymn books lay open on every seat. I called out, "Hello, Park Service." My voice echoed strangely, like the building was much larger inside than it appeared outside. No answer. but I could swear I heard something. Faint singing, just at the edge of hearing. Beautiful harmonies, the kind that raise goosebumps on your arms. I stepped inside. The temperature dropped 20 degrees. My breath came out in small puffs. The singing grew clearer, though I still couldn't see anyone. Voices blending together like they'd been practicing for years. Rock of Ages, cleft for me, let me hide myself in thee. The same hymns I'd grown up with. The same melodies that used to fill my father's church every Sunday. But the pews were empty. I spent an hour searching that church building. Every pew, every corner, even the small room behind the pulpit where preachers kept their robes. Nothing. But the singing never stopped. The oil lamps burned without any visible fuel. The hymn books were brand new, pages crisp and clean. On the pulpit lay an open Bible, its pages fluttering in a breeze I couldn't feel. The Bible was turned to Mark 16:18. They shall take up serpents, and if they drink any deadly thing, it shall not hurt them. My skin crawled. I'd heard those words plenty of times growing up. Snake handlers loved that verse, claimed it gave them the right to test God with deadly snakes. My father always preached against such foolishness. I tried my radio. Static. Then, faintly, I heard music. Not the dispatcher, but hymns playing through the speaker, the same songs echoing through the church. Outside, the sun was setting. I needed to make camp, figure out what was happening. But as I walked toward the door, I heard footsteps behind me. I spun around. A man stood at the pulpit, tall, thin, wearing a black suit and white collar. His face was pale as moonlight, his eyes dark as coal. He smiled at me with teeth too white, too perfect. "Welcome, brother," he said. His voice carried no accent, but something about it made me think of old graveyards and forgotten prayers. "You've come to join our service." "I'm a park ranger," I said, fighting to keep my voice steady. "This is federal land. You can't—" "Federal land?" He laughed, and the sound made my bones ache. "Brother, this is God's land. Has been since 1843 when the Lord called me to preach in this hollow." 1843. That would make him over 100 years old. But he looked maybe 40, same as me. "Are you Ezekiel Stone?" I asked. His smile grew wider. "You know of me. Good. That will make things easier." He gestured toward the pews. "Please sit. Evening service is about to begin. I need you and your people to move along. This area is restricted." "My people are already here," Stone said. As he spoke, the pews began to fill. Translucent figures materialized in the seats, men in overalls and work shirts, women in simple dresses, their hair pinned back. Children with wide, hollow eyes, all of them pale as fog, staring at me with hungry expressions. 47 people. I counted without thinking. "We died in the middle of worship," Stone continued, his voice growing stronger. "Federal agents poisoned our communion wine, afraid of our faith. But death couldn't stop true believers. We've been holding service ever since, waiting for new brothers and sisters to join us." I reached for my gun. My hand found empty air. The holster was gone. "Violence has no place in God's house," Stone said gently. "Please, brother, sit. Let us show you the power of true faith." The ghost congregation began to sing. Their voices were beautiful, perfect harmonies that made my chest tight with old memories. My father's church, Sunday mornings, my mother's hand in mine as we stood or hymns. I found myself walking toward a pew. "Stop," I told myself. "This isn't real. It can't be real." But the singing was so beautiful, and I'd been alone for so long, carrying my anger at false religion, my disappointment with empty faith. These people had died for their beliefs. Maybe they understood something I didn't. I sat down. The moment I touched the wooden pew, pain shot through my body. Cold, burning cold that made my teeth chatter and my vision blur. I tried to stand, but my muscles wouldn't obey. Stone smiled down at me from the pulpit. "Don't fight it, brother. You'll find peace here. Eternal peace." Through the windows, I saw them coming. Snakes. Dozens of them slithering through the grass toward the church. Copperheads, rattlesnakes, water moccasins. All the venomous species that lived in these mountains, moving together like they were being called. "The serpents know their master," Stone said. "They come to witness our worship, to participate in God's miracle." The snakes flowed through the open door like a living river. They coiled around the pews, draped themselves over the ghost congregation's shoulders, wound around the pulpit. But none of them struck. They moved with an unnatural calm, as if they were tame as house cats. Stone reached down and lifted a massive timber rattlesnake. Its thick body was as long as his arm, its head wide as his fist. Enough venom to kill 10 men. "Behold the power of faith," he said, holding the snake high. "In life, I could handle any serpent. Death has only made that gift stronger." The rattlesnake opened its mouth, fangs glistening. But instead of striking, it seemed to smile. I wanted to run, wanted to scream. But the cold had spread through my whole body, pinning me to that pew like I was nailed there. Then I heard something that made my blood freeze. Voices. Human voices. Coming from outside. "Mom, are you sure this is the way? The trail led here, honey. Maybe someone can help us." A family. Real, living people, walking toward this nightmare. Through the window I saw them. A man and woman, 2 young children, hiking gear, camping clothes. They looked tired, probably lost. Stone smiled. "More believers have come to join us. How wonderful." The ghost congregation turned toward the windows, their hungry eyes fixed on the approaching family. I had to warn them, had to do something. But I couldn't move, couldn't speak, could only watch as they walked toward the open door of the church, toward 47 dead believers who had been waiting 64 years for new souls to add to their eternal congregation. The family stepped through the church door, and I saw their faces change. First confusion, then wonder, then a kind of dreamy peace that made my stomach turn. "Welcome," Stone called from the pulpit. "Please come in. Make yourselves comfortable." The father, a man about my age with kind eyes and work-worn hands, smiled like he'd found something he'd been searching for his whole life. "Thank you. We got turned around on the trail. I'm Jim Patterson. This is my wife Carol and our kids Danny and Sarah. I'm Brother Stone. These are my faithful congregation." He gestured to the ghost-filled pews. "We were just beginning evening worship. Please join us." The Pattersons moved toward the pews like they were sleepwalking. The same cold peace that had trapped me was taking hold of them. But they were alive, unmarked by death. They could still be saved. I fought against the supernatural ice holding me, concentrating all my strength on moving just one finger. Just enough to make a sound, create a distraction. Nothing. Carol Patterson sat down with her daughter. "What a beautiful church," she murmured. "I feel so peaceful here." Young Danny, maybe 8 years old, pointed at the snakes coiled around the pews. "Look, Dad, they're not scared of people." "God's creatures know when they're in a holy place," Stone said. He lifted the timber rattler again, letting it weigh, and around his arm like a living bracelet. "Would you like to touch one, son? They won't hurt you here." "Can I?" Danny's eyes lit up with innocent excitement. "No!" I screamed inside my head. "Run! Get out!" But the boy stepped forward, reaching toward the massive snake. Stone smiled. "True faith makes all things possible. Even a child can handle the most deadly serpent, if his heart is pure." The rattlesnake lowered its head toward Danny's outstretched hand, fangs gleaming, rattle silent as death. I couldn't let this happen. Couldn't sit frozen while a child died because adults had lost their minds. I thought of Ruth, my wife, mending clothes on our porch, of my daughters, probably doing homework at our kitchen table, of all the living people who needed me to come home. The cold cracked, just a little. My pinky finger twitched, then my hand, my arm. I stood up fast, the wooden pew clattering behind me. "Don't touch that snake!" I shouted. The spell broke. The Pattersons blinked like they were waking from a deep sleep. Danny jerked his hand back. The rattlesnake's head snapped toward me, eyes burning with supernatural rage. "You dare interrupt God's service?" Stone's voice boomed through the church. The oil lamps flickered. The ghost congregation turned to stare at me with expressions of cold fury. "These people need to leave," I said, backing toward the door. "Now!" Jim Patterson shook his head like he was clearing cobwebs. What were we doing?" "You were joining us," Stone said, his voice smooth as honey again. "Brother Kingfisher here has lost his faith. He doesn't understand the beauty of true worship." "How do you know my name?" I hadn't told him. Stone smiled. "I know many things about you, David. I know your father was a preacher. I know you lost your faith when you saw how corrupt men had made religion. I know you've spent years running from God." The ghost congregation began to hum, low, haunting melodies that made the air thick and hard to breathe. "But you can't run forever," Stone continued. "Deep down, you still believe. You still hunger for the truth your father preached, even if he preached it poorly." He was right, and that terrified me. Despite everything I'd seen in churches, despite all the hypocrisy and greed and empty ritual, part of me still yearned for something real, something worth believing in. "We can give you that," Stone said, reading my thoughts. "Pure faith, unshakable belief. All you have to do is stay." The Pattersons were looking back and forth between us, confusion clear on their faces. But I could see the supernatural peace trying to creep back into their eyes. "What's happening here?" Carol whispered. "These people are dead," I told them bluntly. "They died in 1897. They're trying to trap you here." Jim laughed uncertainly. "That's crazy talk, mister." "Look at them," I said. "Really look." The family stared at the congregation. Slowly, recognition dawned. The translucent skin, the two still breathing, the clothes that belonged to another century. Sarah, the daughter, began to cry. "It's all right, child," Stone said gently. "Death is nothing to fear. We're happier now than we ever were in life. We worship without distraction, without the petty concerns of the flesh. You can join us, all of you." "We're leaving," Jim said, grabbing his wife's hand. But when they tried to walk toward the door, they couldn't. Their feet moved, but they stayed in place, like they were walking on a treadmill. "I'm afraid that's not possible," Stone said. "You've entered consecrated ground, participated in our worship. You belong here now." The snakes began to move, flowing across the floor toward the family, not striking, not threatening, just surrounding them, cutting off any escape. I looked around the church desperately. There had to be something I could use, some weakness in whatever supernatural force held this place together. Then I saw it. Behind the pulpit, a small door I hadn't noticed before, E4. It stood slightly open, revealing darkness beyond. "What's back there?" I asked. Stone's smile faltered for just a moment. "Nothing that concerns you." Which meant it concerned me very much. I lunged toward the door. Stone raised his hand, and I felt that crushing cold trying to freeze me again. But now I knew it could be fought. I pushed through, muscles screaming, and grabbed the door handle. Behind it was a small room filled with communion supplies. Silver cups, plates, bottles of wine. And in the center, a wooden box with poison written on the side in faded letters. The strychnine that had killed the congregation. Still here, after 64 years. "Stop!" Stone shouted. His perfect composure cracked, revealing something desperate underneath. "You don't understand. We died in the middle of worship. We have to finish the service. We have to prove our faith was real." I understood then. They weren't holding people here out of malice. They were trapped themselves, doomed to repeat their final church service until they could prove they had died for something meaningful. They needed living believers to validate their faith, to make their deaths matter. But that didn't make it right. I grabbed the poison box. The moment I touched it, the ghost congregation screamed, not with their voices, but with a sound that came from somewhere deeper than sound. The church building shook. Cracks appeared in the walls. "You're tearing apart the holy ground," Stone cried. "Without the church, without the service, our deaths meant nothing. We'll be lost forever." Maybe that was exactly what needed to happen. "Some things," I said, "are better lost." I raised the poison box over my head, ready to smash it against the floor. That's when Stone played his final card. "If you destroy this place," he said quietly, "everyone dies. The living and the dead. The poison that holds us here will be released. These people you're trying to save will breathe it in and join us whether they want to or not." He was right. I could see it in the way the Pattersons had already begun to cough, in the bitter taste creeping into my own mouth. The supernatural preservation of this place was the only thing keeping the poison contained. I lowered the box, mind racing. There had to be another way. And slowly, I began to realize what it was. "You want to finish your worship service," I said to Stone. "Fine. Let's finish it properly." Stone's eyes narrowed. "What do you mean?" "A real service. Not this supernatural puppet show." I set the poison box down carefully and walked back into the main church. "You died because someone poisoned your communion wine. But what were you trying to prove with all the snake handling? What was the point?" "To demonstrate faith," Stone said. "To show that true believers—" "No," I shook my head. "That wasn't faith. That was pride." The ghost congregation stirred restlessly. Some looked confused, others angry. A few seemed thoughtful. I continued. "You handled snakes because you wanted to prove you were special, better than other Christians, more faithful, more worthy." "We risked our lives for God," Stone protested. "You risked your lives to feel superior to others," I shot back. "Just like every hypocrite I grew up around. They lied and cheated Monday through Saturday, then acted holier than everyone else on Sunday. You folks took it further, sure, but it was still just pride wearing a religious costume." Jim Patterson was listening intently. His wife held their children close, but I could see she was following my words too. "Real faith doesn't need to prove itself," I said, thinking of Ruth mending clothes on our porch, of my daughters saying their simple bedtime prayers. "Real faith is quiet, personal. It doesn't demand an audience." Stone raised the rattlesnake higher. "You dare lecture us about faith? You who ran from God when religion disappointed you?" "I didn't run from God," I realized as I said it. "I ran from people who used God as an excuse to feel important." For the first time since I'd entered this church, I felt completely calm. The supernatural cold couldn't touch me now. The fear that had been eating at my heart for years was melting away. "You want to know what real faith looks like?" I asked. "It looks like my wife darning socks because we can't afford new ones, but never complaining. It looks like helping lost hikers find their way home, not because anyone's watching, but because it's the right thing to do. It looks like admitting when you don't have all the answers." Some of the ghost congregation were nodding now. An old woman in the front pew smiled sadly. A young man near the back removed his hat, like he was finally ready to listen. "We were wrong," the old woman whispered. Her voice was like wind through pine trees. "We made faith into a performance." Stone whirled toward her. "Martha, you cannot—" "We can," she said firmly. "We've had 64 years to think about what we did, about why we really handled those snakes and drank that poison." Other voices joined her, quiet admissions, regretful confessions. "I wanted people to think I was holy. I was afraid they'd call me a coward if I didn't. I forgot it was supposed to be about love, not fear." Stone's perfect composure finally cracked completely. The rattlesnake in his hands began to writhe, sensing his spiritual turmoil. "No, we died for our faith. It has to mean something." "It does mean something," I said gently. "It means you learned the hard way what faith really is, and what it isn't." The church was changing around us. The fresh paint was fading, showing the weathered wood beneath. The oil lamps were flickering out one by one. The supernatural preservation that had held this place together was dissolving. But the poison wasn't being released. Instead, I could smell pine trees and mountain air flowing in through windows that had been sealed for decades. "You can let go now," I told the congregation. "You don't have to keep proving anything. Your deaths were tragic, but they taught you something true. That's enough." One by one, the ghost congregation began to fade, not disappearing in fear or anger, but peacefully dissolving like morning mist. They smiled as they went, relieved, finally free. The old woman was the last to go. "Thank you," she said to me, "for showing us what we couldn't see." Stone stood alone at the pulpit, still holding the rattlesnake, but the snake was changing too, becoming sluggish and ordinary. Just a wild animal that wanted to escape back to the forest. "I was their preacher," Stone said quietly. "I led them astray. How can I face judgment knowing that?" "The same way the rest of us do," I said, "by admitting we made mistakes and hoping for mercy." Stone looked down at the rattlesnake. Gently, carefully, he set it on the floor. The snake immediately slithered away, heading for the open door and freedom. "Will you pray with me?" Stone asked. "Not as preacher and congregation, but as two men who got lost and want to find their way home." I nodded. We knelt together in front of that old wooden pulpit, in a church that was rapidly returning to the ruins it should have been all along. We prayed simple words, honest words. The kind of prayer that doesn't need an audience because it comes from the heart. When I opened my eyes, Stone was gone. But the peace lingered. I woke up at dawn in my sleeping bag, camped in a small clearing. The Pattersons were nearby, just beginning to stir. Their camping gear was arranged normally, like any family on a hiking trip. "Morning," Jim called over. "Thanks again for helping us find a good campsite last night." I stared at them. Do you remember anything else about last night?" Carol laughed. "Just that we got turned around on the trail and you helped us get oriented. Good thing you came along when you did." They had no memory of the church, no memory of the ghost, congregation, or the snakes. It was like none of it had happened. But I remembered every detail. Where the church had stood, I found only the stone foundation of an old building. Weathered. Markers showed where 47 people had been buried in 1897. Wildflowers grew between the graves, planted by no human hand. My radio crackled to life. Normal dispatcher chatter. My compass pointed north again. My watch showed the correct time. I helped the Pattersons find their way back to the main trail, then hiked out myself. The forest was alive with bird songs and insect chatter, natural sounds that had been missing in that supernatural hollow. Sheriff Collins met me at the ranger station. "How'd it go up there? Get them snake handlers moved along?" "There weren't any snake handlers," I said truthfully. "Just some lost campers making more noise than they realized. All taken care of now." He nodded, satisfied. "Good work, Dave. Knew you'd handle it right." That evening I sat on my porch with Ruth while she mended clothes. Our daughters were inside doing homework, their young voices drifting through the open windows. "How was your trip?" Ruth asked. I thought about how to answer, how to explain what I'd learned about faith and pride, about the difference between real religion and performance religion. "Educational," I said finally. She smiled. "Find what you were looking for?" I wasn't looking for anything, but I found something anyway. Ruth set down her sewing and took my hand. "What's that?" "That maybe I haven't been as far from faith as I thought. Maybe I just needed to learn what faith really looks like." She squeezed my fingers. "Took you long enough to figure that out." We sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun set over the mountains. Somewhere up in those hills, 47 souls had finally found peace. And somewhere else, living people were learning what it means to believe in something bigger than themselves. Not through handling snakes or drinking poison or putting on religious shows, just through the quiet miracle of loving each other and doing what's right, day after day, without needing anyone to applaud. That's faith enough for anyone. 3 months later, I got a letter from the National Park Service. They were starting a new program, training rangers to work with religious groups who wanted to hold services on public lands. They'd heard I had experience with mountain religious communities, and wanted to know if I'd be interested in leading the program. I wrote back and said yes, because I'd learned something important in that hollow. Running away from religion because of hypocrites is just another form of pride. Real faith isn't about avoiding bad examples. It's about becoming a good one. And sometimes, if you're lucky, you get the chance to help other people tell the difference between the two. The work isn't always easy. Mountain religious communities can be suspicious of outsiders, and federal agents can be suspicious of mountain religion. But I've found that most people, when you get right down to it, are looking for the same thing those 47 souls were searching for in that hollow. Something real to believe in. Something that makes the hard parts of life bearable and the good parts mean something. Something that connects us to each other and to whatever force created these beautiful, terrible, mysterious mountains. I can't give people that faith, but I can help them find it for themselves in their own way, without anyone getting hurt. That's enough purpose for one lifetime. And sometimes, late at night when the wind is just right, I swear I can hear singing, drifting down from Old Rag Mountain. Not the desperate, prideful hymns of people trying to prove their worth, but the quiet, joyful songs of souls who have finally found their way home. It's the most beautiful sound in the world. My name is Patricia Ironcloud, but everyone calls me Pat. I've been a park ranger for 13 years now, working the High Knob area of Jefferson National Forest here in Southwest Virginia. Before that, I was a nurse in the emergency rooms around coal country. That was before I lost my license for speaking up about things I shouldn't have spoken up about. November is always quiet in the mountains. Most hikers stay home when the first snow comes, and that's fine by me. The forest feels peaceful when it's just me, the trees, and the cold wind. But this morning wasn't peaceful at all. Steve Rodriguez, our park medic, called me on the radio at 6 in the morning. "Pat, we got a problem," he said, and I could hear the worry in his voice. "Emergency services keep getting calls from the old company hospital, you know, the one that's been shut down for 8 years. I knew it well. The Blackwell Company Hospital sat on a ridge about 16 miles from the nearest town. Built back in the 1920s to serve coal miners and their families. Closed down in 1978 after some federal investigation. The building has been empty ever since, just broken windows and rusted medical equipment." "What kind of calls?" I asked, pulling on my ranger jacket. "Medical emergencies, mining accidents. But here's the weird part. The calls are coming from the hospital's old phone system, the one that was shut off when the place closed." I stopped buttoning my jacket. "That's not possible." "That's what I said. But 3 different emergency services got calls last night, all from that hospital, all asking for help with injured miners." The drive up to the hospital took me 40 minutes on winding mountain roads. Snow had started falling harder, making the old access road slippery. As I got closer, I could see the hospital building through the bare trees, a big gray concrete structure that looked like it belonged in a scary movie. I parked my truck and grabbed my emergency medical kit, old habits from my nursing days. The front doors of the hospital stood wide open, which was strange. The county usually kept the place locked up tight. Inside, the smell hit me first. Medical disinfectant, strong and fresh, like someone had just cleaned the floors. But that was impossible. This place had been empty for 8 years. The lobby looked like it always did. Broken chairs, peeling paint, old signs pointing to different departments. But something felt wrong. I couldn't put my finger on it at first. Then I realized what it was. It was warm inside. Not just warmer than outside, actually warm, like the heat was working. And I could hear something. Faint sounds coming from deeper in the building. Beeping sounds, like heart monitors. I called out, "Hello? Anyone in here?" My voice echoed off the walls, but the beeping sounds continued. I should have left right then, should have called for backup and waited outside. But I was curious, and my medical training made me want to check if someone really needed help. The sounds were coming from the second floor, so I climbed the old staircase. The steps creaked under my feet, but they felt solid. Too solid for a building that had been falling apart for 8 years. At the top of the stairs, I found the source of the beeping, the old cardiac unit. Through the doorway, I could see heart monitors lined up along the walls, all of them working, all of them showing steady heartbeats on their screens. But there were no patients in the beds. I walked into the cardiac unit, and my skin started to crawl. The machines were definitely running. I could see the green lines moving across the monitors, could hear the steady beep, beep, beep of normal heart rhythms. But every bed was empty. I checked the power outlets. No electricity. I followed the cords. From the machines to the walls, but nothing was plugged in. The monitors were running on their own. "What the hell?" I whispered. That's when I heard footsteps in the hallway behind me. Slow, deliberate steps like someone wearing heavy boots. I turned around, but the hallway was empty. The footsteps stopped right outside the door. I waited, holding my breath. Nothing. Just the sound of the heart monitors and my own pulse hammering in my ears. I walked to the doorway and looked both ways down the hall. Empty. But I could smell something new now, mixing with the disinfectant smell. Something metallic, like blood. The surgical wing was at the end of the hall. I knew I should leave, should get back to my truck and call this in. But something was pulling me forward. Maybe it was my old nursing instincts, or maybe it was just plain stupidity. The surgical wing doors were heavy metal, the kind that swing both ways. I pushed through them and immediately wished I hadn't. 3 operating rooms, all with their lights on. Surgical instruments laid out on metal trays like someone was about to use them. The instruments were clean and shiny, but the tables underneath had dark stains on them. Fresh, dark stains. In the middle operating room, I found him. A young man, maybe 25, lying unconscious on the operating table. He was dressed in hiking clothes, the kind of gear someone would wear for a day trip in the mountains. There was an IV in his arm, connected to a bag of clear fluid hanging from a pole. I rushed to his side and checked his pulse, strong and steady. His breathing was regular but shallow, like he was heavily sedated. There was a medical chart clipped to the end of the table with his name, Robert Kim. "Robert, can you hear me?" I shook his shoulder gently, but he didn't respond. I looked at the chart. It was filled out in neat handwriting describing symptoms I'd never seen before. "Patient presence with acute spiritual contamination," it read. "Requires immediate surgical intervention to prevent permanent spiritual damage." Spiritual contaminant. Ion? That wasn't any medical term I knew. I started to unhook the IV when I heard a voice behind me. "I wouldn't do that if I were you, Nurse Patricia." I spun around. Standing in the doorway was a man in a white doctor's coat. He was older, maybe in his 60s, with gray hair and wire-rimmed glasses. He looked completely normal except for one thing. I could see right through him to the wall behind. "The patient is in a very delicate state," he continued, walking toward me. His footsteps made no sound on the floor. "Removing the sedation too quickly could cause severe complications." I backed away from the table, my hands shaking. "Who are you? What's going on here?" "Dr. Harrison Blackwell," he said, extending a transparent hand that I definitely wasn't going to shake. "I'm the chief of medicine here, and you must be Patricia Ironcloud, the ranger who used to work in emergency medicine." How did he know that? How did he know my full name? "You're dead," I said. "This hospital has been closed for 8 years." Dr. Blackwell smiled. "Death is just another medical condition, Nurse Patricia. And like any medical condition, it can be treated." Other figures started appearing in the room. Nurses in old-fashioned white uniforms, orderlies in scrubs. All of them transparent, all of them moving like they had work to do. "We have many patients here," Dr. Blackwell continued. "Minors who died from conditions that were misdiagnosed during their lifetimes. Black lung disease, silicosis, injuries from unsafe working conditions. They still need medical care." "That's impossible," I said. But even as I said it, I could hear sounds throughout the hospital. Coughing from the respiratory ward, moaning from the emergency room, the sound of wheelchairs rolling down hallways. "Nothing is impossible in medicine, nurse. You should know that." Dr. Blackwell picked up a surgical instrument, one from the tray. It was solid in his transparent hands. We've been treating these patients for 8 years now, but we need help, living help, someone with medical training who can assist with the more complicated procedures. I looked down at Robert Kim. His face was peaceful, but I could see surgical marks on his chest now, fresh incisions that hadn't been there a minute before. What did you do to him? We're helping him, just like we help all our patients. Mr. Kim was exposed to spiritual contamination while hiking in these mountains. Without treatment, it would have killed him within days. You're crazy. Spiritual contamination isn't real. Dr. Blackwell's smile faded. You've spent 13 years in these mountains, Nurse Patricia. You know there are things here that modern medicine doesn't understand. The spirits of miners who died from neglect and medical malpractice. They're still sick. They still need treatment. The other ghost medical staff were moving around the room now, preparing surgical instruments, checking monitors that showed impossible readings. It looked like any busy hospital, except everyone was dead. I'm leaving, I said, backing toward the door. And I'm taking him with me. I'm afraid that's not possible, Dr. Blackwell said. The patient hasn't completed his treatment yet. And besides, we have other patients arriving soon. The lights in the operating room flickered, and I heard new sounds from outside. Sirens. Getting closer. But there were no roads for emergency vehicles up here, and no way for them to get through the snow. The sirens were coming from inside the hospital. I ran. Left Robert Kim on that table and ran straight for the staircase. Behind me, I could hear Dr. Blackwell calling out, "Nurse Patricia, we need you here. The patients are arriving." The sirens were getting louder, echoing through the empty hallways like they were coming from the walls themselves. I took the stairs 3 at a time, desperate to get outside, to get to my truck, to get away from this place. But when I reached the first floor, I see, topped dead. The lobby wasn't empty anymore. Hospital gurneys were lined up in rows, each one carrying a patient. Some were clearly miners. I could tell from their clothes and the coal dust that seemed permanently worked into their skin. Others looked like hikers wearing modern outdoor gear. All of them were unconscious, all hooked up to IVs and monitors. Ghost nurses moved between the gurneys, checking charts, adjusting equipment. They worked efficiently, like this was just another busy day at the hospital. I recognized one of the patients, Sarah Chen, a hiker who had gone missing 3 weeks ago. The search and rescue teams had looked for her for days before giving up. Now she was here, lying on a gurney with surgical marks on her arms. "Sarah?" I knelt beside her gurney and shook her shoulder. She didn't respond, but I could see her chest rising and falling steadily. "She's receiving treatment for acute exposure to mining trauma," said a voice beside me. I looked up to see a ghost nurse with kind eyes and a name tag that read, Ellen Murphy, RN. Mining trauma? She's a hiker, not a miner. "The mountain doesn't make that distinction," Ellen said. "The spirits of the dead miners don't understand the difference between someone who works in the mines and someone who just visits. To them, anyone who enters their territory is at risk." I looked around the lobby at all the patients. "How many people are missing?" 17 so far this winter, Ellen said. "But don't worry, Dr. Blackwell is very good at what he does. Most of them will survive the treatment." Most of them. I stood up and backed away from the gurneys. "This is insane. You're all dead. This hospital has been closed for 8 years. "Time works differently here," Ellen said. "For us, it's still 1978. The day the government investigators came and shut us down. The day Dr. Blackwell..." She paused, looking sad. "The day everything went wrong? What happened in 1978? Ellen glanced around nervously, then moved closer to me. Dr. Blackwell was covering up the mining injuries and diseases, making false reports to keep the mining company happy. Hundreds of miners died because they didn't get proper treatment. My blood ran cold. So he was killing people, not on purpose. He thought he was helping the company, helping the economy. But when the federal investigators came, when he realized what he had done..." Ellen's voice dropped to a whisper. "He couldn't live with the guilt. He took his own life right here in the hospital." I looked toward the staircase where I could still hear sounds of medical activity from the upper floors. And now? Now he's trying to make up for it, trying to heal all the people he failed to help when he was alive. But death has changed him. He doesn't understand that his treatments are harming living people. A new sound echoed through the hospital. Footsteps on the stairs, heavy boots, just like I'd heard before. "He's coming," Ellen whispered. "You need to decide, Nurse Patricia. Will you help us save these patients, or will you try to stop us and let them die from spiritual contamination?" The footsteps reached the bottom of the stairs. Dr. Blackwell appeared, no longer the polite doctor from before. His face was twisted with anger, and his transparent form seemed to flicker like a bad TV signal. "Nurse Patricia," he said, his voice echoing strangely, "I need your assistance immediately. We have a medical emergency." Behind him came two ghost orderlies carrying another patient on a gurney. This one was awake, struggling against the straps that held him down. It was Steve Rodriguez, the park medic who had called me this morning. "Pat," Steve shouted when he saw me, "don't let them operate on me. They're not doctors, they're something else." Dr. Blackwell ignored Steve's protests. "The patient is experiencing severe psychological distress from exposure to mining spirits. He needs immediate treatment to prevent permanent mental damage." I could see what they had done to Steve. There were IV marks on both his arms, and his eyes had a glassy, drugged look. But he was fighting it, trying to stay conscious. "This patient requires surgical intervention," Dr. Blackwell continued. "I need a living nurse to assist with the procedure. The spiritual energy of the living is necessary for the more complex treatments." "No," I said, backing toward the front doors. "I won't help you hurt people." "Hurt them?" Dr. Blackwell's voice rose. "I'm trying to save them. Do you know how many miners died because I failed them? Do you know how many families I destroyed with my cowardice?" The temperature in the lobby dropped suddenly. Frost began forming on the windows, and my breath came out in white clouds. "I can fix it," Dr. Blackwell said, his form becoming more solid, more real. "I can heal the spiritual wounds that I caused. I can cure the diseases that I failed to treat. But I need help from the living world." All the ghost medical staff stopped what they were doing and turned to look at me. Their eyes were pleading, desperate. "Please," Ellen whispered. "We just want to heal people. Isn't that what you wanted to do when you were a nurse?" I looked at all the unconscious patients, at Steve strapped to the gurney, at the ghost doctors and nurses who truly believed they were helping. That's when I realized the horrible truth. They weren't evil. They were just wrong. Terribly, dangerously wrong. "I'll help you," I said. Dr. Blackwell's face lit up with relief. "Excellent. We need to begin the surgical procedure immediately. But first, I need to understand what you're really doing here," I continued. "Show me the medical records. Show me the treatments you've been performing." Dr. Blackwell hesitated. "There's no time for that. The patient's condition is deteriorating." Steve tried to speak, but the Druths, Giaz, were making it hard for him to form words. "Pat, don't. Trust." "Doctor," I said, using my most professional nurse voice. "In my 13 years of medical experience, I've learned that you can't treat a patient properly without understanding their complete medical history. Show me the records." It was a gamble, but it worked. Dr. Blackwell nodded and gestured for me to follow him to the old nurses' station. The ghost medical staff continued their work, preparing for surgery that I prayed would never happen. The records were kept in filing cabinets that should have been empty. But when Dr. Blackwell opened them, I saw hundreds of patient files, all meticulously maintained. "Here," he said, pulling out a thick folder, "are success stories." I opened the first file. The patient was a miner named Thomas Davies, treated in 1978 for advanced black lung disease. According to the records, Dr. Blackwell had performed something called spiritual lung replacement surgery. The notes described removing Davies' diseased lungs and replacing them with purified spiritual tissue. The file included a photograph of Davies after the surgery. He looked healthy and strong, smiling at the camera. But there was something wrong with the picture. Davies was transparent, just like the medical staff. "Doctor," I said carefully. What happened to Thomas Davies after his surgery? He was cured. Look at the post-operative notes. No more coughing, no more pain, no more difficulty breathing. I flipped through more files. Every single patient showed the same pattern. Successful surgery, complete recovery, and then transparency. They had all died during the procedures. Dr. Blackwell, I said, these patients aren't cured, they're dead. His face went blank. No, that's not correct. Look at the vital signs. All stable, all healthy. Their vital signs are stable because they don't have bodies anymore. You killed them. I healed them, he shouted, and the windows in the lobby shattered. The temperature dropped even more, and ice began forming on the walls. Steve's gurney started rolling toward the elevator, pushed by invisible hands. The other patients' gurneys began moving too, all heading for the surgical floors. You're making the same mistake you made 40 years ago, I said, following Dr. Blackwell as he stormed after the gurneys. You're so focused on treating the disease that you're killing the patients. I'm not making mistakes anymore, he said. I know exactly what I'm doing. I have 40 years of practice. We reached the surgical floor, where the ghost medical staff was preparing multiple operating rooms. Steve had been wheeled into the main OR, where Dr. Blackwell began scrubbing his transparent hands. Doctor, listen to me, I said. You feel guilty about the miners who died, right? You want to make up for the medical malpractice? Of course I do. That's why we're here. But you're not making up for it. You're making it worse. Every person you cure dies just like the miners did. Dr. Blackwell stopped scrubbing his hands. For the first time since I'd met him, he looked uncertain. The miners who died because of your medical malpractice. They're still here, aren't they? Still suffering from the diseases you failed to treat properly? Yes, he whispered. They come to the hospital every night, coughing, choking, begging for help. And you can't really help them, can you? Because they're already dead. The damage is already done. Dr. Blackwell's form began to flicker more rapidly. But I have to try. I have to make it right. You can't make it right by repeating the same mistake. You can't cure death with more death. The other ghost medical staff had stopped their preparations and were listening to our conversation. Ellen Murphy stepped forward. Doctor, she said quietly, maybe the ranger is right. Maybe we've been hurting people instead of helping them. No, Dr. Blackwell said. We're healers. We save lives. We're not alive, Doctor, Ellen said. We can't save the living. We can only join them in death. The truth was sinking in. I could see it in Dr. Blackwell's transparent face. The guilt that had driven him to suicide 40 years ago was the same guilt that was driving him to kill people now. The only way to stop hurting people is to stop trying to heal them, I said. Let the living take care of the living. Let the dead find peace. Dr. Blackwell looked at Steve, strapped to the operating table, then at all the other patients throughout the hospital. But what about the miners? He asked. What about the people I failed? They're not your patients anymore, doctor. You can't be their doctor anymore. The only thing you can do for them now is let them go. Dr. Blackwell stood there for a long moment, his hands shaking. Then, slowly, he began to remove his surgical gloves. Ellen, he said, please discharge all the living patients. Immediately. The ghost medical staff began moving, removing IVs, unhooking monitors, wheeling gurneys toward the exits. They worked with the same efficiency they had shown before, but now they were working to save lives instead of end them. As they worked, Dr. Blackwell began to fade, not flickering like before, but actually becoming fainter, more transparent. Doctor, Ellen called out. It's time, Ellen. It's time for all of us to go. One by one, the ghost medical staff began to fade as well. They had spent 40 years trying to make up for a mistake that couldn't be fixed. Now, finally, they were ready to let go of the guilt and find peace. I woke up in my truck 6 hours later. Steve was shaking my shoulder, looking worried. Pat, wake up. Are you okay? I sat up, confused. I was in the driver's seat of my truck, parked outside the old hospital. The building looked exactly like it always had. Broken, empty, abandoned. What happened? I asked. You tell me. I got worried when you didn't answer your radio, so I came looking for you. Found you passed out in your truck. How long have you been here? I looked at the hospital. The windows were broken, just like they should be. There were no lights inside, no sounds of medical equipment. It looked like a building that had been empty for 8 years. Steve, I said slowly, didn't you call me this morning about emergency calls coming from the hospital? He frowned. No, I've been in town all day. Haven't called you since yesterday. I checked my radio. No record of any call from Steve. No reports of missing hikers named Robert Kim or Sarah Chen. According to the official records, nothing had happened at all. But when Steve helped me out of the truck, I found something in my jacket pocket that hadn't been there before. A hospital ID badge with my picture on it. It read, Patricia Ironcloud, RN, Jefferson Memorial Hospital. Jefferson Memorial, not Blackwell Company Hospital. I never told anyone what really happened that day. Who would believe it? But I did some research later, and I found out that the official records were wrong about a few things. Dr. Harrison Blackwell didn't commit suicide in 1978. He died of a heart attack while trying to destroy evidence of medical malpractice. The investigators found hundreds of false medical records showing that he had been covering up mining-related diseases and injuries for decades. 847 miners died because of inadequate medical care during Dr. Blackwell's time as chief of medicine. The hospital was scheduled to be demolished next month, but the county ran out of money. It's still there, still empty, still broken. Mostly empty, anyway. Last week I was driving past the hospital and I saw something that made me stop. Someone had put new flowers on the steps of the building. Fresh flowers, like someone had just left them there. There was a small card with the flowers. It read, For all the patients we couldn't save. The medical staff of Jefferson Memorial Hospital. I kept the hospice's TAL ID badge. Sometimes, late at night, when I'm doing paperwork in the ranger station, I take it out and look at it. It reminds me that some mistakes can't be fixed, no matter how much we want to fix them. But it also reminds me that sometimes, the only way to heal is to let go. The official reports say that 17 hikers went missing in our area this past winter. All of them were found alive, suffering from exposure and altitude sickness. They were treated at the county hospital and made full recoveries. None of them remember how they got lost or where they spent the missing days. I do my job differently now. When hikers go missing, I search harder and faster than before. I don't wait for backup. I don't follow standard procedures, because I know that somewhere out there, in abandoned places where guilt and good intentions have gone wrong, there are still people who think they're helping. And sometimes the people who want to help you the most are the ones you need to run from the fastest. The hospital is still empty, but on quiet nights when the wind is just right, you can sometimes hear sounds coming from inside. Sounds like medical equipment running, like people working to save lives. I always drive a little faster when I pass it now. Some doctors never stop practicing medicine, even after they should.